The rain came sideways off the Mississippi that night, sharp enough to sting the skin, and the man walking through it did not flinch. He had been walking for almost 4 hours. Water spilled from the brim of a cheap black cap, ran down the back of a jacket with a torn elbow, soaked through a faded gray shirt, and filled boots that had once belonged to a dead man whose name he would never know. Everything about him had been chosen carefully: the unshaven jaw, the tired shoulders, the second-hand jeans, the canvas tool bag with scratches along the sides, even the small limp he allowed himself whenever someone was watching. He looked like a man who had lost whatever battle life had put in front of him and was too stubborn to admit he was finished. That was exactly how Alessandro Bruno wanted the world to see him. 11 doors had closed in his face since noon. At the first, a contractor had asked for references, looked at Alessandro's empty expression when he said he had none, and laughed before closing the door. At the fourth, a garage owner had glanced at his clothes and told him they did not hire drifters. At the seventh, a landlord repairing a fence had called him chief in that particular tone, men used when they wanted another man to understand he did not belong in their neighborhood. At the 11th door, a property office on Frenchman Street, Alessandro had met Dominic Reyes. Reyes wore a clean white shirt, an expensive belt, and the easy smile of a man who enjoyed being respected by people poorer than himself. He had looked Alessandro up and down for less than 2 seconds before deciding what he was worth. "Nothing for you here," Reyes had said. "Try the mission over on Rampart. They might have something for a guy like you." Alessandro had thanked him. Reyes had already looked away. The smile never changed. Alessandro remembered the face anyway. He remembered every face. 40 years of survival had taught him that a man's true nature often appeared most clearly in the way he treated someone he believed could never hurt him. Tonight, everyone believed Alessandro Bruno could never hurt them. That was the point. 3 miles uptown, behind iron gates, security cameras, limestone walls, and men carrying weapons worth more than the clothes on his body, Alessandro had another life waiting for him. There were tailored suits in a cedar wardrobe, a wine cellar beneath a house, large enough to hide a family for a month, armored cars, accountants, lawyers, politicians who returned his calls before the second ring, and captains who would cross the city at 3 in the morning if he spoke their names once. There were men who would kill for him, and men who feared being killed by him. There were people who had spent years trying to earn 5 minutes at his table. Yet tonight, Alessandro had spent 4 hours learning what happened when all of that disappeared. Nobody moved aside for him. Nobody lowered their voice. Nobody called him sir. Men looked at him like trash and forgot his face before he reached the sidewalk. He had expected the humiliation. What he had not expected was how useful it would feel. The streets talked freely around powerless men. Shopkeepers complained. Delivery drivers cursed. Collectors bragged. Men who would have sealed their mouths at the sight of one of Alessandro's black cars spoke openly in front of a wet handyman whose stomach had been empty since breakfast. That was why he was here. For 8 months, money had been moving strangely through his territory. Collections were arriving light. Businesses that had been protected under long-standing agreements were suddenly making additional cash withdrawals. 2 neighborhood owners had sold unexpectedly. A third had disappeared. Rumors mentioned men collecting in Alessandro Bruno's name, but none of those men appeared in any ledger approved by Alessandro. Someone inside his organization was building something underneath him, not enough to challenge him openly, not yet, but enough to test where the floorboards were weak. Alessandro had sent accountants first. They found nothing. He had sent 2 trusted soldiers. The streets became quiet the moment they arrived. He had questioned 3 captains. All 3 swore the numbers were clean. So Alessandro had done the one thing no one expected a man in his position to do. He disappeared. Only 4 people knew where he was, and only 1 knew his exact purpose. His oldest lieutenant, Paolo De Luca, had called the plan madness. Alessandro had told him madness was repeating the same investigation while expecting a different liar. Paolo had argued that if anyone recognized him, there would be consequences. Alessandro had replied that if anyone recognized him dressed like this, they deserved a promotion. So the boss had put on another man's boots and gone where bosses never went, the bottom. Now the rain was getting heavier. His stomach was beginning to ache, and for the first time in years no one was waiting nearby with an umbrella. Alessandro almost smiled at the absurdity of it. Then he saw the light. It was a small square of yellow, glowing through a fogged window on the corner of a narrow street, 2 blocks from the river. Above it hung a hand-painted sign whose letters had faded under years of Louisiana heat and storms. Marchand's. Open. Alessandro stopped beneath an awning across the street and watched for a moment. A diner. Old red vinyl booths. 6 stools at a counter. A pie case near the register. 1 woman moving behind the glass. No customers. The sensible thing was to keep walking. His rented room under the name Alex Barnes was 11 blocks away. He had enough information for one night. He could call Paolo from the encrypted phone hidden beneath the lining of his jacket. A car could reach him in minutes. Instead, he stood staring at the warm light, like a man who had forgotten what warmth looked like. He told himself he needed coffee. That was the excuse. Then he crossed the street and pushed open the door. A little brass bell rang above him. Warm air touched his face. The smell of coffee, butter, onions, cinnamon, and something simmered for hours hit him with such force that for half a second he simply stood there breathing. Behind the counter, a woman looked up from wiping the coffee machine. She was somewhere in her 30s, perhaps 36 or 37, full-figured, soft through the hips and waist, wearing a blue dress beneath a white apron. Her dark hair was twisted into a loose knot, strands falling near her cheeks from a long day's work. There was flour near one wrist and a tiredness beneath her eyes that did not manage to make her face hard. Alessandro noticed faces. It was one of the skills that had kept him alive. He noticed tension around mouths, lies behind smiles, calculation in pupils, the brief tightening of skin before a man reached for a weapon. What he saw on this woman's face confused him, because there was no calculation at all. She looked at a soaked stranger dripping on her freshly mopped floor, and she smiled, not cautiously, not politely, warmly. "Well, come in," she said. "You're letting half the storm in with you." Alessandro looked behind himself, as if perhaps she meant someone else. "Sorry. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to the floor. I just mopped it." He almost stepped backward. She laughed. "I'm kidding. Lord, look at you. Sit down before you catch pneumonia." She reached for a mug before he had moved. Alessandro approached the counter slowly. "Ma'am, I don't have much cash." She glanced at him. "Did I ask?" "I can pay for coffee." "Good. Then you can pay for coffee." She poured it. "And if anything else happens to appear in front of you, we'll call it a weather emergency." Alessandro stared at her. She set the mug near the stool closest to the register. "Sit. That stool's warmest." Heater vents under the counter. He sat because he had suddenly lost the desire to argue. He wrapped both hands around the coffee. Heat entered his fingers, traveled through his wrists, and reached something deeper than it should have. The woman studied him for half a second, then looked away deliberately, as though she understood that watching a hungry man accept kindness could turn kindness into humiliation. Alessandro noticed that too. "My name's Betty," she said while opening the pie case. "Betty Marchand. This place belonged to my husband's father, then my husband, and now apparently it belongs to every broken pipe and tax bill in the state of Louisiana." Alessandro looked up. Marchand. Hence the highly creative sign. She placed a slice of warm pecan pie in front of him. "I didn't order that." "I know. I said I can only pay for coffee. And I said weather emergency. You do this with every stranger who walks in?" "Only the ugly ones." Alessandro stared at her. Betty's mouth twitched. "You should see your face." Something escaped him before he could stop it. A laugh. Small, rough, almost unused. Betty seemed pleased with herself and turned toward the sink. Alessandro looked down at the pie. He could not remember the last time someone had made him laugh without first checking whether it was safe. He took a bite. Warm sugar and butter filled his mouth, and hunger overruled suspicion. He ate faster than he intended. Betty continued cleaning, giving him the privacy of pretending not to notice. Halfway through the slice, she asked, "You passing through? Looking for work? What kind?" "Handyman." The answer had become easier after repeating it 11 times. "Carpentry, wiring, plumbing, roofing, whatever breaks." She leaned an elbow on the counter. You any good? Good enough. That sounds like a man who thinks he's very good. Alessandro sipped his coffee. Been doing it a long time. That was true, in a strange way. Before suits, soldiers, warehouses, and political favors, before Alessandro Bruno's name meant anything outside one Italian block, he had been the son of a mechanic. His father had believed paying someone to repair something you could learn to repair yourself was a moral failure. Alessandro had spent his childhood holding flashlights, rebuilding carburetors, replacing rotten boards, and being shouted at for handing over the wrong wrench. Those hands had later signed orders worth millions, but they had never forgotten how to use tools. Betty nodded toward the ceiling near the jukebox. A brown stain spread across 2 tiles. Beneath it sat a plastic bucket, catching a slow drip. How good are you with roofs? Better than whoever repaired that last. Nobody repaired it. That explains it. Betty laughed again. Roofs leak 2 years. Every contractor I call wants $400 before he even tells me how much the real repair costs. Roof inspections cost money. So does food. Food wins. That philosophy is why your roof leaks. That philosophy is why my customers eat. Alessandro looked at her. She met his eyes without defensiveness, as if she had already argued this with the world and decided she was done apologizing. How many places did you try today? She asked. 11. 11. 11. 11. And nobody hired you? Nobody wants a man without references. You got tools? Alessandro nudged the bag with his boot. Some. Know how to fix a roof? Yes. Then you have one reference now. He stopped with the mug halfway to his mouth. Betty pointed upward. Mine. You don't know me. I know you walked through that storm after 11 people told you no. That doesn't make me trustworthy. No, but it makes you stubborn. She folded the cleaning rag and set it aside. Stubborn I can work with. Alessandro's eyes narrowed slightly. What exactly are you offering? You fix what you can around here. I'll pay what I can. It won't be much, so if somebody with real money comes along, you take the better job and don't feel guilty about it. Until then, every day you work, you eat. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, if you're still here. Why? The question came out harsher than he intended. Betty blinked. Why what? Why would you do that? He lowered his voice. A stranger comes in, soaked, says he has no references, tells you he can fix things, and you offer him work and food. You don't know if I'm lying. You don't know if I steal. Betty considered him for a long moment. Alessandro expected a sentimental answer. Instead, she shrugged. Maybe you are lying. And that doesn't bother you? Of course it bothers me. I'm kind, not stupid. The register locks and the shotgun under the counter works. Alessandro looked toward the counter. Betty smiled. Now you're wondering whether I'm joking. Are you? Maybe. For the second time that night, Alessandro almost smiled. Then Betty's expression softened. Somebody helped me once, she said. That's the real answer. She looked toward the dark kitchen. My husband died 6 years ago. Car accident. One phone call, then suddenly, I had a funeral, this diner, 14 different kinds of debt, and a stack of bills I didn't understand. I nearly lost everything. There was a week I had $12 in my checking account and pretended I wasn't hungry because if I ate, I couldn't put gas in the car. Woman I barely knew, owned a bakery 4 streets over. She sat me down, put soup in front of me, and told me I wasn't finished just because life had decided to hit me while I was already on the ground. Betty smiled faintly. She died 2 years later. Never let me repay her. Said the only way to pay kindness back was to give it forward when you got the chance. She looked at Alessandro's worn jacket, then his eyes. So here you are. Something tightened behind Alessandro's ribs. He disliked emotional debts because they could not be calculated. Money had numbers. Loyalty had consequences. Fear had predictable exchange rates. Kindness offered without leverage had no structure at all. You think I'm your chance. I think you're hungry, and my roof leaks. She pushed the rest of the pie closer. Don't make it complicated. Alessandro lowered his eyes to the plate. He had spent 30 years making everything complicated. That was how power survived. But he finished the pie. He returned at 7 the following morning. Rain clouds still covered the sky, but the storm had broken. Betty was unlocking the front door when she saw him standing under the awning with his tool bag. For a second, surprise crossed her face. Then she smiled. "I wondered if you'd come back." Alessandro felt an unexpected irritation. "I said I would. People say lots of things. I don't." The answer came too quickly, too much like the man he actually was. Betty studied him. Alessandro softened his shoulders. "Usually." "Well, mister, usually, coffee's inside." He spent the morning on the roof. The leak was worse than Betty knew. Flashing had rusted through along one seam. A section of decking had gone soft near an old vent. Someone had patched part of it years earlier using enough roofing tar to qualify as sculpture. Alessandro photographed nothing, wrote no inspection report, and did not waste time pretending the job was smaller than it was. He simply worked. There was something almost peaceful in physical labor. Boards did not lie. Nails did not betray you. A rotten joist did not sit at your table for 20 years before becoming rotten. You found weakness, cut it out, replaced it, reinforced what remained. By 11, Betty appeared at the base of the ladder carrying a plate. "Come down. I'm working. So am I. Then go work. I own the place. I can be insubordinate to myself." Alessandro continued fastening, flashing. "Food's getting cold. I'll eat later." Silence. He drove another screw. Betty said, "If I climb this ladder holding your lunch and fall, my ghost will haunt you." Alessandro stopped. Slowly, he looked down. She was smiling. "That's manipulation." "Correct." "Bad manipulation." "Worked, didn't it?" Alessandro descended. She had made him red beans and rice with sausage, cornbread on the side, iced tea in a mason jar. He ate on an overturned bucket behind the diner while Betty sat on the bottom step. She talked about customers he had not met yet. Mr. Landry came every morning at 6:30 and complained about eggs regardless of how they were cooked. A nurse named Denise ordered the same turkey sandwich 4 nights a week after her shift. Betty employed 2 waitresses, Keisha and May, but Tuesday mornings were slow, so she usually worked alone. Alessandro listened. He told himself he was memorizing useful neighborhood information, yet when Betty described Mr. Landry's granddaughter getting into Tulane, Alessandro caught himself asking what she planned to study. That had nothing to do with Fontaine, Reyes, or missing money. He asked anyway. Days accumulated quietly. The first day, he repaired the roof. The second, he replaced wiring behind the kitchen wall that should have started a fire years earlier. On the third, he discovered the walk-in cooler compressor was failing and spent 6 hours bringing it back to life. Betty stood beside him afterward, hands on her hips. "You know what the repair company quoted me for that? Too much. $2,300. They were going to replace parts you didn't need. How do you know?" "Because most people pay when they're afraid food will spoil." Betty stared at him. "You really are good." Alessandro wiped grease from his hands. "I told you." "You said good enough." "I was being modest." Terrible look on you. Slowly, routine formed. He arrived early. Betty handed him coffee before speaking. He worked until lunch. She forced him to sit. He protested less every day. Sometimes he listened from a ladder while customers talked. Sometimes he repaired cabinet hinges near booths and heard conversations that had nothing to do with him. He learned more about the neighborhood in 1 week than his people had learned in 6 months. There were complaints about extra collections, but nobody spoke names loudly. One delivery driver mentioned new taxes. A pawn shop owner used the phrase, second envelope. A butcher said a man on Dauphine had started charging for Bruno twice, then looked over his shoulder and changed the subject. Alessandro filed every word away. He also learned things he had not come to learn. Betty gave Mr. Howe Marister Landry free breakfast every Friday because his pension ran thin near the end of each month. She pretended his granddaughter had prepaid. His granddaughter had not. A young mother named Erica sometimes came in with 2 children and ordered 1 plate. Betty always accidentally made too much food and brought the children another plate. Keisha's electric bill had been paid late twice, both times from Marchand's account, although Betty herself had postponed paying the diner's produce supplier. Alessandro discovered all of this because numbers were his natural language, and Betty's books were kept in a drawer he had to remove while repairing the register cabinet. He did not snoop deliberately. He did not need to. Her generosity was written everywhere. "You're going to go broke," he told her one afternoon. Betty was rolling silverware. "Probably. You gave away 12 meals this week. You count my customers' plates? I notice things. That sounds exhausting. It is. Maybe stop. You can't keep feeding people who don't pay." Betty raised an eyebrow. Interesting statement from a man whose first dinner here was free. Alessandro leaned against the counter. "Different." "Why?" He opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. Betty smiled victoriously and returned to the silverware. "That's what I thought. At least charge them eventually. Some do pay eventually. And the others? Maybe they'll feed somebody else someday. That is not a business model. You fixing my roof for half what it's worth isn't a business model either." Alessandro's jaw tightened. Betty pointed a fork at him. "See? We're both terrible businessmen." "I am not." She laughed so hard she had to put the silverware down. Alessandro turned back toward the cabinet, hiding the smile that threatened his mouth. Paolo called him every night from a secure line. "You've been there 9 days, he said on the 9th evening. Alessandro was standing beneath the awning outside his rented room. "Yes, you found confirmation of secondary collections on 4 streets. We can move." "Not yet." "Why?" "We don't have the top. We have enough names to start shaking branches." "Shake branches and the bird flies." Paolo went silent. "You always hated metaphors." "I still do." "Then I'll ask plainly, is this still about the investigation?" Alessandro stared across the wet street. "Of course." Another silence. Paolo had known him 32 years. Silence from Paolo was never empty. "You repaired the woman's sign today." Alessandro's gaze sharpened. "How do you know that?" "Because the 2 men watching you sent pictures. I told them to stay 4 blocks away. They used a long lens." "Fire them." "They're my nephews." "Then fire them twice." Paolo sighed. "Ale." "What?" The sign had nothing to do with the investigation. Alessandro looked toward the glow of Marchand's several blocks away. He had spent 3 hours sanding the wood, repainting the letters and replacing the rusted brackets. It looked terrible. "Ah." "What does ah mean?" "Nothing." "Paolo, it means I'm glad the investigation required calligraphy." Alessandro ended the call. He stood under the awning for another minute, irritated because Paolo was wrong and more irritated because Paolo was not entirely wrong. The first unmistakable crack in Alessandro's discipline came on a Thursday night. Rain had started again just before closing. Keisha left early to pick up her son. The final customers departed at 9:30. Betty flipped the sign to closed, locked the door, and poured 2 coffees. Instead of staying behind the counter, she carried both mugs to a booth. "Sit." Alessandro looked around. "There's work." "There is always work." "The shelf in the pantry will remain heroically attached to the wall until morning. 1 bracket is loose. Alex." The false name sounded strange from her now. He had chosen Alex because it was close enough to answer instinctively, and far enough from Alessandro Bruno to mean nothing. Yet when Betty said it, he sometimes forgot it was false. "Sit down." He sat across from her. Rain tapped the windows. The diner looked smaller after hours, intimate, in a way Alessandro tried not to notice. Betty wrapped both hands around her mug. "You never tell me anything." "I talk. You answer questions like you're being deposed. Maybe your questions are invasive. I asked your favorite food yesterday. Personal information." Betty smiled. "See?" Alessandro looked toward the window. "What do you want to know?" "Family." His body changed before he could stop it. Betty noticed. "You don't have to answer. My parents are dead." "Siblings?" "No." "Married?" "No." "Ever?" Alessandro looked into his coffee. "A long time ago." That was almost true. There had been a woman, decades earlier, before the empire became large enough to devour ordinary relationships. It had ended before marriage, but not before Alessandro learned what betrayal looked like when it wore perfume. "What happened?" Betty asked softly. She wanted a different man. "Different from you?" "Different from who I was becoming." Were you becoming somebody terrible? Alessandro's eyes lifted. Most people would have laughed after asking that. Betty did not. Maybe. And now I know exactly what I am. That wasn't the question. He felt something tighten. You ask dangerous questions. You keep saying that like I should be impressed. Most people are. Most people sound tiring. He laughed quietly. Betty watched him with a softness that made him uncomfortable. There, she said. What? That. What? You look different when you laugh. Alessandro's amusement vanished. Better? Younger. I'm not young. Didn't say you were. Betty. Relax. I'm not asking for your birth certificate. He looked away. She let the silence rest a moment before asking, Are you lonely? That one went through him cleanly. Alessandro had been threatened with guns and knives, subpoenaed by federal prosecutors, betrayed by men he had loved like brothers. Few things had caught him as unprepared as a diner owner asking if he was lonely. Everyone's lonely, he said. That's what lonely people say. You speak from experience? Betty smiled faintly. Widow, 6 years, small business, 2 employees I love, but don't want a burden. You figure it out. Alessandro looked at her. You could remarry. You offering? The question was playful. His reaction was not. Their eyes held 1 second too long. Betty's smile slowly faded. Heat moved through the silence. Alessandro saw the moment she realized the joke had landed somewhere real. He could have rescued them both with another joke. Instead, he said, No. Her face changed almost imperceptibly. Right. That's not what I... He stopped. Betty looked at him. Alessandro Bruno, who could negotiate contracts, ceasefires, bribery networks, and political coalitions without notes, could not figure out how to finish one sentence in a diner booth. I've been alone a long time, he said finally. Because people usually see what I want them to see. And what do you want them to see? Power, control, distance. The answer stayed inside him. Someone who doesn't need anything. Betty studied him. That sounds miserable. Alessandro almost denied it. Instead, he said, Sometimes. She leaned back. Whoever taught you to be that careful did a number on you. Maybe I taught myself. Then you did a number on yourself. He exhaled through his nose. Betty smiled gently. You don't have to be that careful here. His fingers moved before he decided to move them. Across the formica. 1 inch. Then another. Betty's hand rested near her mug. He could have touched it. The urge was absurdly strong. He had touched women before. Beautiful women. Women who had known his name before knowing his face. None of it had ever felt dangerous. This did. His phone vibrated inside his jacket. Not the cheap prepaid phone Alex Barnes carried. The other one, the real one. Alessandro froze. Betty looked toward his chest. You going to get that? No. It vibrated again. Only 4 people had that number. Nobody used it twice unless something mattered. Alessandro withdrew his hand. The warmth between them disappeared like a light being switched off. I need to go. Betty's eyes flickered. Sure. Betty, it's late. She stood too quickly and picked up the mugs. Rain slowing anyway. He wanted to explain something. He could not explain without explaining everything. So he did what he had done his entire life when truth threatened control. He left. Outside, beneath the rain, he answered the phone. Paolo spoke first. We have a name from Dauphine. Alessandro looked back through the diner window. Betty stood alone at the counter, wiping a surface that was already clean. Tell me, Dominic Reyes. Alessandro's eyes narrowed. Property office on Frenchman? Paolo paused. You know him? I met him. He's one of the collectors. Small level. Money moves through him every Tuesday, then disappears into a private account, before resurfacing under 3 shell businesses. We're tracing up. Alessandro looked again toward Betty. Tuesday. Yes. Something cold settled inside him. Keep tracing. We can pick Reyes up tonight. No. Ale. Nobody touches him. Why? Because I want to see who comes to him when he thinks he's safe. Alessandro ended the call. He did not sleep much. 4 days later, on Tuesday afternoon, Dominic Reyes walked into Marchand's. Alessandro was on the roof replacing a vent cap when he saw the car pull up. the same silver sedan. Reyes stepped out, wearing another clean shirt, and the same smile. Alessandro's body went still. Through the edge of the window below, he saw Betty look toward the door. Her posture changed immediately. It was subtle. Shoulders slightly inward, hands suddenly busy. Smile replaced by something careful. Alessandro climbed closer to the roof edge. Reyes entered. He said something Alessandro could not hear through the glass. Betty opened the register. That was enough. Alessandro's jaw tightened. She counted bills. Reyes leaned against the counter as though waiting for room service. Betty handed him an envelope. Reyes opened it, counted slowly, then counted again. Betty stood watching him count her money in front of her. Alessandro felt a sensation so sharp he almost moved without thinking. He stopped himself. The first rule of surviving betrayal was understanding the whole shape before cutting any piece away. Reyes pocketed the envelope. He said something that made Betty's face tighten. Then he smiled, tapped 2 fingers against the counter and walked out. Alessandro stayed crouched behind the roofline until the car disappeared. 5 minutes later, he climbed down. Betty was scrubbing the counter hard enough to remove varnish. "Who was that?" he asked. Her back remained toward him. "Nobody. Looked like somebody. Neighborhood association." Alessandro leaned against the doorway. "Neighborhood association collects cash in envelopes?" Betty stopped scrubbing. "Keeps things safe around here." "Safe from what?" She turned. Her smile was there, but it had no warmth. "Alex, leave it alone." "How much?" "What? How much does he take?" Something flashed in her eyes. Fear, then anger at having shown it. "Not your business. You hired me to fix things." "Not that. If he's threatening you..." I said leave it. Alessandro's face changed for 1 second. Betty saw it. He knew because she stopped breathing. The handyman disappeared from his posture. His shoulders settled differently. His eyes lost every trace of softness. Something older, colder, and much more dangerous looked through them. Then Alessandro forced it away. "Fine," he said. Betty stared at him as though trying to place what she had just seen. "The roof's done," he added. "Wiring tomorrow. You don't have to keep fixing everything." "I know." He picked up his tool bag. "That's why I'm doing it." That night, Alessandro sat in the rented room with the real phone in one hand and stared at Reyes's photograph on the screen. Paolo had already provided enough to end him. Address, girlfriend, gambling debt, collection route, 2 storage units, 1 illegal handgun registered to nobody. Alessandro could make a single call, and Dominic Reyes would vanish from New Orleans before sunrise. 10 years earlier, he would have done it without thinking. 20 years earlier, he would have done it himself. Tonight he did neither. Not because Reyes deserved mercy, because Reyes was a thread, and Alessandro wanted the rope. He also knew something else he did not want to admit. If he ended the operation too quickly, the disguise ended. The investigation ended. Marchand's ended. There would be no reason for Alex Barnes to return to the diner. No reason for Betty to hand him coffee at 7. No reason to hear her complain that he left screws on the counter. No reason to sit near the register and be told to eat. Alessandro stared at the phone and hated the clarity of his own mind. He had built an empire by refusing to lie to himself, even when he lied to everyone else. The truth was simple. He wanted more time. So he called Paolo. "Trace Reyes upward. Nobody moves until I know every person touching the money. That could take weeks. Then it takes weeks." Paolo was silent. "Something else?" Alessandro asked. "No. Say it. You sound very committed to financial accuracy." Alessandro hung up. The investigation deepened. So did the lie. Alessandro repaired the front steps. He replaced a broken hinge on the walk-in. He rebuilt pantry shelving. When Betty complained the old sign rattled in strong winds, he removed it, reinforced the frame, and repainted the letters by hand. "You know this isn't your diner, right?" she asked while watching him from the sidewalk. It looked embarrassing. It looked historic. It looked rotten. "That sign's older than you." "Unlikely." Betty squinted at him. "How old are you?" "Old enough to know rotten wood." Coward. He almost told her. 49. The number reached his tongue. He swallowed it. Every true detail felt dangerous now, because each made the eventual lie heavier. Betty seemed to sense something pulling away inside him, but she did not press. That restraint hurt worse. He began noticing things about her he had no business noticing. The way she tucked hair behind her ear when calculating bills. The way she hummed old Motown songs while making pie crust. The way she touched every table before leaving at night, as though the diner were not property but a living thing entrusted to her. He noticed the softness of her body when she squeezed past him behind the counter, then became angry with himself for noticing. He noticed the smell of vanilla and coffee in her hair. He noticed that when she laughed hard, she covered her mouth with one hand. He noticed that she pretended not to be tired until everyone else left. One afternoon, he found her sitting alone in the storeroom staring at a stack of invoices. "Problem?" he asked. Betty quickly straightened. "No. You're a terrible liar." Interesting criticism from a man who answers questions like a witness under protection. Alessandro's chest tightened. "Supplier? Produce. How much? None of your business. You need the cooler fixed again? No." She rubbed her forehead. "Just numbers." Alessandro glanced at the invoice. "You're 30 days behind." Betty looked up sharply. "You read upside down?" "Yes, of course you do." "You could negotiate net 60. They won't." "Have you asked?" "Twice." "Wrong person. And who would you ask?" Alessandro almost said the owner's name. He knew the company. One call from his office would change Betty's payment terms by sunset. Instead, he looked away. "Someone higher." "That's your answer to everything, huh?" "Usually works." Betty folded the invoice. "Not everybody can walk into a room and make people listen." The words landed with almost comic precision. Alessandro's mouth went dry. "No," he said softly. "I suppose not." Betty studied him. "Sometimes I think you used to be somebody. Everybody used to be somebody. That's not what I mean." He held her gaze. "What do you mean?" "I don't know." She smiled faintly, but suspicion lingered. "You don't move like a man who spent his life being ignored." Alessandro's pulse slowed rather than quickened. Danger always sharpened him. How does an ignored man move? "Smaller. Maybe I got tired of being small." Betty considered this, then nodded. "Good answer." He hated how relieved he felt when she let it go. By the second week, Paolo had traced Reyes's collections through Dauphine Street to a network of shell accounts linked to a name Alessandro knew well. Marcus Fontaine. The message arrived at 1:17 inches the morning. Alessandro sat on the edge of the rented bed, reading the name 3 times, as though repetition might change the letters. Marcus Fontaine had been 19 when Alessandro first met him. Skinny, angry, sleeping in the back room of a boxing gym after his father disappeared. Alessandro had given him work, later responsibility, later authority. Marcus had proven loyal through 2 wars with rival crews, a federal investigation, and an internal succession dispute that had nearly split the organization 15 years earlier. He had eaten Christmas dinner at Alessandro's table. Alessandro had attended his daughter's baptism. Fontaine had once taken a bullet meant for Paolo. 20 years of history, and now his name sat at the top of a theft network, bleeding poor businesses through Alessandro's reputation. Alessandro called Paolo. "You're certain?" 3 independent trails. "Show me." Documents arrived. Alessandro read every page. Properties, cash withdrawals, collection schedules, false protection accounts. Fontaine had been building a private kingdom in cracks nobody thought to inspect. The amounts were not large enough to threaten Alessandro financially. That almost made it worse. Fontaine had not betrayed him out of desperation. He had betrayed him because he thought the bottom of the city was too insignificant for Alessandro to notice. "How many businesses?" Alessandro asked. "At least 32, probably more." "Marchands?" Paolo hesitated. "Yes." Alessandro closed his eyes. "How long?" 18 months. "How much?" Paolo gave him the number. It was not enormous by Alessandro's standards. He had spent more on one dinner for 6 politicians. But he imagined Betty counting bills beneath Reyes's smile. He imagined the unpaid produce invoice, the old cooler, the leaking roof. Free meals she refused to stop giving, even while Fontaine's men took the rest. "Ale? I'm here. Say the word." Alessandro looked at the rain beyond the window. "Not yet. We have him. We have Fontaine." I want everyone who knew. You think captains looked away? Money survives because somebody closes a door. He paused. Open every door. Understood. Alessandro ended the call and sat alone until dawn. The guilt surprised him. Alessandro had felt responsibility many times. Guilt was different. Responsibility was logistical. You corrected a mistake, replaced a man, paid a debt. Guilt entered the body and stayed there even when solutions existed. Fontaine had acted without permission, but the world that allowed him to act had Alessandro's fingerprints everywhere. Alessandro had built a structure where fear traveled faster than truth. A collector could tell Betty, "Bruno wants more," and why would she question it? Men like Alessandro trained ordinary people not to question powerful names. He had always believed rules separated his organization from animals like Reyes. No violence toward families, no drugs sold near schools, no predatory collection against businesses unable to pay, no freelancing under the Bruno name. He had treated those rules as evidence of discipline. Now, standing in Marchand's the next morning, while Betty placed coffee before him, he realized rules meant nothing to people who never knew they existed. Betty had lived 18 months believing Alessandro Bruno's world was slowly strangling her. In a way, she was right. "You look awful," she said. "Thank you." "Sleep?" "Some. Liar." She slid eggs and toast toward him. "Eat." Alessandro looked at the plate. "Not hungry." Betty stopped. "That's how I know something's wrong." "What?" "You've stopped arguing when I feed you." He looked up at her. She smiled, but concern sat behind it. "You want to tell me?" The truth rose like pressure behind his teeth. "I know who is hurting you. I know why. My name is the weapon. I can end it tonight." Instead, he said, "Work problem. Found another job?" There was something small beneath the question. Fear he would leave. Alessandro heard it. "No." Betty tried to hide her relief. "Good. I mean, not good that you have a problem. Good that you're not." She waved a hand. "You know." "Leaving?" She looked toward the coffee machine. "I assume eventually." Alessandro wanted to say not yet. Instead, he picked up his fork. "The pantry shelf still needs another brace." "Ah, yes. A multi-week national infrastructure project." He smiled despite himself. Betty smiled back. 3 nights later, their closeness nearly became something neither could pretend away. Betty had cut her palm on a broken glass. It was shallow, but blood appeared quickly. Alessandro crossed the kitchen before she finished, saying she was fine. He took her wrist and guided her hand beneath cool water. "It's nothing." "Glass cut?" "Obviously. Could be inside." "There isn't. You don't know." "Alex, I have owned dishes for 36 years. Sit." She stared at him. "You are very bossy for an employee." "Sit." Betty sat. Alessandro opened the first aid kit, cleaned the cut, and inspected it under the kitchen light. His hands were large and steady around hers. Betty stopped joking. The air shifted. "You've done this before," she said quietly. "Bandaged cuts. Stayed calm around blood." Alessandro's fingers paused. "Life gets messy." Another terrible answer. "You ask too many questions." "Maybe you answer too few." He finished wrapping her palm. When he looked up, her face was closer than he expected. Neither moved. Betty's eyes dropped briefly toward his mouth, then lifted. Alessandro's heartbeat changed. He could have kissed her. She would not have stopped him. He knew it with the same certainty he knew when a man at a table was bluffing. That certainty frightened him more than uncertainty. If he kissed her, Alex Barnes would become real, in a way Alessandro Bruno could no longer dismiss as camouflage. Worse, Betty would be kissing a man who did not exist. He released her hand. "Keep it dry." Her expression closed. "Right. Betty, you've got work tomorrow." "I know. Good night, Alex." She turned away. Alessandro stood there for several seconds, hating himself for the disappointment in her shoulders. Then he left. The next Tuesday arrived hot and humid after days of rain. Alessandro knew Reyes would come. Paolo's surveillance confirmed the route. He considered staying away. He also knew he would not. At 4:30, the diner was nearly empty. Alessandro stood on a ladder replacing an old fluorescent fixture near the rear booths. Betty worked behind the register. At 4:47, the bell rang. Dominic Reyes entered. This time his smile was thinner. "Afternoon, Betty." Alessandro continued loosening the fixture, cap low. "Dominic." Betty's voice changed exactly as it had the previous week. "You're early." "Busy day." Reyes glanced around. His eyes passed over Alessandro without recognition. The man he had rejected 2 weeks earlier had been too insignificant to remember. Alessandro found that useful. "You got it?" Betty opened the register. "Last week you said the amount was staying the same." "Things changed." "You raised it last month." "Neighborhood's changing." "Nothing changed." Reyes smiled. "New people to keep happy." Alessandro's hand stopped turning the screwdriver. Betty lowered her voice. "Dominic, I can't do more." "Everybody says that." "I mean it. I'm behind with suppliers. Keisha needs more hours. The cooler nearly died. I can't keep." "Betty." Reyes tapped the counter. "You've been doing business here a long time. You know how this works." "I know how it used to work." "Used to is expensive." She looked at him. "Who exactly am I paying?" Reyes' smile vanished. "Careful." Betty swallowed. Alessandro watched through peripheral vision. "I just want to know where my money goes." "Your money goes toward making sure your windows stay unbroken." Silence. "That sounds like a threat," Betty said. "Sounds like insurance." "From who?" Reyes leaned closer. "From bad luck." Alessandro felt the familiar coldness enter him. It was the state men around him feared most. Anger in Alessandro did not produce shouting. It removed heat. His thoughts became slower, cleaner, sharper. He counted 3 customers, 1 near the window, 2 in the corner booth. He noted the angle of Reyes's right hand, the weight in his jacket pocket, likely a pistol. Betty opened the register and counted money. Her fingers trembled once. Reyes noticed. Alessandro saw him enjoy it. That enjoyment decided something. Betty placed an envelope down. Reyes opened it, counted. His expression hardened. "Short. That's what I have." "It's short by 200. "I don't have 200. "Then find it." "From where?" "Not my problem." "It becomes your problem if the diner closes." Reyes chuckled. "Maybe somebody else wants the corner." Betty stared at him. "Is that what this is?" Reyes leaned forward. "This is me telling you the fee went up, and I'm telling you I can't." The 2 customers in the rear sensed tension and became quiet. Alessandro stepped down 1 rung but stopped. Reyes placed both palms on the counter. "Listen carefully. Places that don't pay have accidents." Betty went pale. "Grease fires happen. Windows break. Maybe somebody walks in at night and nobody hears it." His voice lowered. "You live upstairs sometimes, don't you?" Alessandro descended another rung. Betty's chin lifted. "Get out." Reyes blinked. "Excuse me? Take what's there and get out." "You really want to talk like that?" "I'm done being afraid of you." It was brave. Alessandro knew bravery well enough to recognize it as fear, moving forward instead of backward. Reyes smiled slowly. "A woman alone shouldn't say things like that." Betty's face changed. "I'm not alone." Reyes glanced toward the customers, then toward Alessandro on the ladder. "This?" He laughed. "Old men and a handyman?" Alessandro's eyes lifted. Reyes still did not recognize him. "You're alone when it matters, Betty." He reached across the counter and took her wrist. The contact lasted perhaps 1 second before Alessandro began moving. Betty made a small sound, more shock than pain. Reyes's grip was not hard enough to injure. It was worse in another way. Deliberate, casual, a demonstration that he could touch her whenever he wanted. Alessandro came down the ladder 1 rung at a time. He did not hurry. Later, Betty would remember that more clearly than anything else. The lack of hurry. A normal man who saw a woman grabbed might rush, shout, threaten. Alessandro simply descended, as though the entire outcome had already been decided, and only the steps remained. He reached the floor, removed the screwdriver from his belt, set it carefully beside the toolbox. Then he walked toward the counter. "Let go of her wrist." Reyes turned. "Mind your business." Alessandro stopped 6 feet away. "It became my business." Reyes smirked. You got a death wish, old man? Alessandro's eyes moved to Reyes's hand. Let go. Something in his voice changed. The false roughness disappeared. The slightly tired, uncertain cadence of Alex Barnes vanished with it. What remained was low, level, and precise. Betty looked at him sharply. Reyes heard it too, but arrogance held him in place. You have any idea who I work for? Yes. Reyes laughed. Alessandro continued. Marcus Fontaine. The laugh stopped. Dauphine Street Collection House. Tuesday drops. 3 shell accounts routed through Magnolia Property Holdings, Garrison Waste, and Pelican Shore Consulting. Reyes released Betty, without realizing he had done it. Alessandro took one step closer. You collect Frenchmen, Royal, Chart, and 6 businesses along Burgundy. Wednesday mornings, Fontaine moves the cash through a courier named Silas Trent. Silas keeps 20% off book because he thinks Marcus doesn't know. Reyes' face lost color. Betty stared between them. Who the hell are you? Reyes whispered. Alessandro glanced at Betty's wrist. A faint red mark remained where Reyes's fingers had been. Something inside him went utterly still. He stepped close enough that Reyes could smell rain and metal on his clothes. You know what your mistake was, Dominic. Reyes said nothing. You believed powerless people don't matter. Alessandro's eyes held his. That is a very expensive mistake. Who are you? Reyes repeated. His voice had become thin. Alessandro leaned near his ear and spoke 4 words. I am Alessandro Bruno. Reyes stopped breathing. Recognition did not arrive all at once. It moved through his face in stages. Disbelief, calculation, memory, horror. His eyes searched the torn jacket, the cheap cap, the worn boots, trying desperately to reconcile them with the man whose photograph rarely appeared publicly, but whose name circulated through every criminal network in Louisiana. Then Reyes remembered the property office, the drifter he had dismissed, the man he had told to try the mission. His mouth opened. No. Alessandro's expression did not change. You looked at me for 2 seconds, 2 weeks ago. Reyes took one step backward. Mr. Bruno, I had no idea. Exactly. I swear, if I knew, that is the problem. Alessandro's voice remained quiet. You would have treated me differently if you knew who I was. But you believed I was nobody, so you showed me exactly who you are. Reyes looked toward the door. Please, go. Confusion crossed his face. What? Go to Fontaine. Alessandro stepped closer. Tell him a ghost has been walking his streets for 2 weeks in a dead man's boots. Tell him I know every route, every account, every collector. Tell him I know who has been wearing my name. Reyes' legs seemed uncertain beneath him. Alessandro lowered his voice. And tell him, I saw whose wrist you touched. Terror sharpened Reyes' face. Mr. Bruno. Run, Dominic. Reyes ran. The bell above the door rang violently as he pushed through it. One of the customers near the window stood, left cash on the table, and hurried out without looking back. The 2 in the corner followed. Within seconds, the diner was empty, except for Alessandro and Betty. The door swung closed. Rain began tapping the glass again, soft at first. Alessandro remained facing the entrance. Behind him, he could hear Betty breathing. He wanted to turn around and found that for the first time in decades, he was afraid to see someone's face. Alex. Her voice shook. Alessandro closed his eyes. That isn't your name, is it? He turned. Betty stood behind the counter with one hand around the wrist Reyes had held. There was no gratitude in her expression, no relief, only confusion slowly hardening into fear. Alessandro removed his cap, straightened. It was a small movement, but the disguise seemed to collapse with it. The tired handyman posture disappeared. His shoulders settled naturally. His chin lifted. His eyes stopped pretending to be uncertain. Betty took one step backward. That single step hurt him more than it should have. No, he said. Alex isn't my name. He called you Bruno. Alessandro said nothing. Dominic looked like he was going to be sick. Her eyes searched his face. He was afraid of you. Yes. Who are you? Betty. Who are you? Her voice cracked against the walls. Alessandro had heard men scream his name while dying. He had heard prosecutors say it in court, politicians whisper it at private dinners, enemies spit it like a curse. He had never hated the sound of his own name until he had to give it to her. Alessandro Bruno. Betty stared. He watched recognition arrive. Everyone in New Orleans knew the name, even if they did not know the face. Newspaper rumors, federal investigations, old stories parents warned sons not to repeat too loudly. Businesses protected by agreements nobody admitted existed. Men who disappeared from positions of power without explanation. Alessandro Bruno belonged to that part of the city ordinary people pretended not to see. Betty's lips parted. No. Yes. No. She shook her head. You fixed my roof. I did. You ate breakfast at my counter. Yes. You said you couldn't afford. She stopped. Alessandro did not move. Was any of it true? She whispered. The question struck harder than accusation. Alessandro looked around Marchand's, the repaired sign beyond the window, the new light fixture, the pantry shelf, the chipped mug near the sink that Betty had begun using only for him. More than you think. Don't. Betty. Don't give me some clever answer. Her eyes were wet now. Were you ever broke? Not recently. Homeless? No. Looking for work? Not the way you thought. She laughed once, a broken sound with no humor. Oh my God. I came here because... You came here lying. Yes. He forced himself not to soften it. I did. Betty pressed both palms to the counter. Why? Alessandro looked toward the closed door. There were men he could call who would solve every threat within minutes. There were explanations he could choose that would make him look better. He rejected all of them. If anything between them had ever been real, the next words had to be real too. Someone inside my organization has been stealing from me. Betty flinched at the word organization. Alessandro continued. They've been running collections I never authorized. Using my name on streets they had no authority to touch. Money was disappearing. Every time I sent men to investigate, people stopped talking. So I came myself. Dressed like that. Yes. Pretending you were nobody. Yes. And me? He met her eyes. I didn't know you existed. Betty swallowed. So I was what? Convenient? At first, the diner was a place to listen. At first. Then it wasn't. She looked away. Don't. You asked for the truth. Then give me facts, not whatever this is. Alessandro nodded once. Dominic Reyes works for Marcus Fontaine. Fontaine is one of my captains. Betty's eyes returned to him. Captain, a man I trusted, and Dominic has been taking money from me for 18 months. I know. You know? I found out recently. How recently? Alessandro hesitated half a second too long. Last week. Betty recoiled as though slapped. Last week? I needed the entire network. So you knew he was extorting me, and you let him come back. I was watching him. You let him come back here. I had people watching. I didn't know that, she shouted. I didn't know anything. Silence slammed into the room. Alessandro had commanded rooms full of violent men with less difficulty than standing before one furious woman. You were never in danger. The moment he said it, he knew it was the wrong thing. Betty stared at him. You don't get to decide that. I had protection nearby. Protection I never asked for from danger. I didn't understand because the man standing in my diner was lying to my face. Alessandro said nothing. Betty's anger grew because he could not contradict her. How rich are you? She asked suddenly. That doesn't matter. It matters to me. Very. She laughed again, this time bitterly. Of course. Her eyes moved across the diner. The first night you told me you could only afford coffee. I had cash for coffee. You know what I mean. Yes. I gave you pie because I thought you were hungry. I was hungry. I offered you food every day because I thought you needed it. I did need it. Betty stared at him. Alessandro's voice dropped. Just not for the reason you thought. That silenced her. Rain became louder against the window. What is that supposed to mean? She asked. Alessandro looked down at his hands. The same hands she had watched repair boards and wiring. Hands that had done far worse things in other rooms. People give me things because they know who I am, he said. They smile because they're afraid not to. They invite me because they want something. They agree with me because disagreeing has consequences. The first night I walked through that door, you thought I had nothing. You believed I couldn't help you. I couldn't repay you. I couldn't make your life easier. You fed me anyway. His throat tightened. He hated it. Nobody has done that for me in a very long time. Betty's eyes filled. So what? This was some vacation from being powerful? No. A game? Never. Then what was I? Alessandro took one step toward the counter. Betty immediately stepped back. He stopped. You were the first person in years who looked at me without seeing my name. Because you hid it from me. Yes. You don't get credit for that. I know. He meant it. Betty wiped at her eyes angrily. You should have told me. I should have. When? Sooner. That's not an answer. The first night would have ended everything. Maybe it should have. The words landed quietly. Alessandro felt them. Betty saw that he felt them and looked away as though that made it worse. You said people only see what you want them to see, she whispered. That night, at the booth, Alessandro remembered. Yes, you were talking about me. I was talking about everyone. But you were sitting there letting me feel sorry for you. I never wanted your pity. Then what did you want? He could have said nothing. He should have said nothing. Instead, the truth escaped. To stay. Betty went still. Alessandro continued because stopping would be another form of cowardice. The investigation gave me a reason to walk through that door. After a while, I didn't need the reason. Betty shook her head. Please don't. I came back because of you. Stop. I fixed things that weren't broken enough to justify fixing. A tear slid down her cheek. Alessandro. It was the first time she used his real name. It sounded nothing like it sounded from anyone else. I stayed because when I was here for a few hours, I wasn't what everyone out there believes I am. But you are. He closed his mouth. Betty's voice lowered. Whatever they believe. Whatever Dominic believes. Whatever made him look at you, like death, walked into the room. You are that man too. Alessandro looked at her. Yes. No excuse. No denial. Betty wrapped her arms around herself. Have you killed people? The question hung between them. Alessandro could lie. Instead, he said, yes. Betty closed her eyes. Oh, God. Betty. No. She stepped back again. Don't come closer. He stayed exactly where he was. Are you going to kill Dominic? Alessandro said nothing. Betty opened her eyes. That means yes. What happens to Reyes is not your responsibility. He grabbed my wrist, and then you told him who you are, and now you're telling me it's not my responsibility. What he has done goes far beyond you. And Fontaine? He betrayed me. What does that mean? It means I handle it. How? You don't want that answer. Betty stared at him for a long moment. Then something in her face changed. Not fear now. Understanding. Terrible understanding. That's exactly the problem. Alessandro felt the room narrow around them. Betty placed one hand against the counter to steady herself. All these months Dominic comes in here taking money, telling me it's Bruno's people, Bruno's rules, Bruno's protection. I hated that name. Alessandro's jaw tightened. I know. Do you? Every Tuesday I counted what I couldn't afford to lose and handed it over because some man said your name like it was God. Her tears came faster now. And then you walk through my door in wet clothes. And I think here is somebody the world has treated badly. Somebody people ignored. Somebody who needs one decent person to say you still matter. Her voice broke. And the whole time you were the name I was afraid of. Alessandro absorbed every word without moving. Fontaine acted without my permission. But he could act because your name worked. Alessandro's silence answered. Dominic knew people would be scared because you built something worth being scared of. Yes, then don't stand there and tell me this has nothing to do with you. I'm not. She looked startled. Most men in Alessandro's position would defend themselves reflexively. Alessandro had survived too long to confuse defense with truth. You're right, he said. Betty blinked. About what? All of it. He looked toward the repaired counter, then back at her. Fontaine betrayed me. Reyes acted without my authority. None of that changes the fact that they used something I built. My name opened the door for them. My world taught people not to ask whether an order carrying that name was real. His voice remained steady, though something inside him felt scraped open. I can punish the men responsible. I cannot pretend I had nothing to do with creating the conditions that made it possible. Betty stared. The anger did not disappear, but she had expected resistance, and his refusal to offer it left her without the fight she had prepared for. "What happens now?" she asked. Alessandro understood she was not asking about Fontaine. "Whatever you decide. You just told me you run half the city, and now I decide?" "About this." He gestured between them. "Yes." Betty shook her head, exhausted. "You make everything sound simple." "It isn't." "No." She laughed weakly through tears. "It really isn't." Alessandro wanted to cross the room. He wanted to take her injured wrist gently, check the mark, tell her Reyes would never touch her again. Every instinct in his life told him to solve the threat first and feelings later. But Betty had made one thing unmistakable. The greatest violation tonight had not been danger. It had been the removal of her ability to choose what danger she was standing near. So Alessandro stayed where she told him to stay. "Reyes will never collect here again," he said. "Neither will anyone else." Betty's eyes hardened. "Because you'll kill them? Because it should never have happened. That doesn't answer me. No, I don't want blood on this floor because of me. There will be none. Not this floor. Anywhere." Alessandro's gaze lowered. Betty saw the answer. "That's what I thought." She wiped her face with both hands and inhaled shakily. "I need you to leave." Alessandro felt the words before fully hearing them. "Betty, please." He stood motionless. "If anything happens, you don't get to turn this into protection. I'm not. You are. You always do that. Something breaks, you fix it. Roof, cooler, shelf, Dominic." Her voice shook. "But you can't fix what you lied about by making more people afraid of you." Alessandro looked at her. There were 1,000 things he could say. He chose the only one that respected the truth. "All right." Betty appeared almost surprised. "That's it? You asked me to leave. And you're just going?" "Yes." "Why?" Alessandro nearly laughed at the impossible question. "Because you asked." He reached slowly inside his jacket. Betty tensed. Alessandro stopped. "Phone." She nodded once. He removed a small card from his wallet and wrote a number on the back. Then he approached the counter only far enough to place it on the edge, keeping the distance she had asked for. "This reaches me directly, day or night." Betty looked at the card but did not touch it. "I don't want—" "You don't have to use it." "Then why give it to me?" "Because whether you ever speak to me again or not, I need you to have a way to reach me if something happens. You said nobody would come. They won't. Then I don't need it. Probably not." "You always this impossible?" "Yes." For one brief second, something like the old Betty appeared in her eyes. Then it disappeared. Alessandro glanced around the diner. Every repair seemed suddenly accusatory. The light fixture, the rebuilt step, the sign, evidence of a man she thought she knew. "The collection stopped tonight," he said. "Everywhere. Everywhere they were unauthorized." "Because of me?" "No." Betty looked at him. "Then why?" "Because they should never have existed." He paused. "That isn't a favor to you. Don't owe me gratitude for correcting something my world allowed." Betty's lower lip trembled. Alessandro continued before courage failed him. "And whatever else existed here." His eyes found hers. "That part was real. You don't get to tell me how real it was." "No." He swallowed. "You decide that too." He picked up the cheap cap from the counter. It suddenly looked ridiculous in his hand. Betty watched him. "Was anything about Alex real?" she asked. Alessandro stopped near the door. Rain streaked the glass beyond him. He turned back. "The roof repair." Betty did not smile. "Alessandro." He looked at her for several seconds. "I really hate raisins." Confusion crossed her face. "What?" "You asked once why I never ate your bread pudding." A tiny sound escaped her, almost a laugh and almost a sob. Alessandro's own expression softened. "I really do hate raisins." Betty covered her mouth. He continued quietly. "My father really was a mechanic. I really learned electrical work from him. I really haven't slept well in years. I really don't have a wife. I really have been alone too long." He paused. "And the night at the booth, when I told you most people only see what I want them to see." His voice dropped. "I was trying to tell you the truth without having the courage to actually tell it." Betty's eyes filled again. "That doesn't make it better. I know." "And when you almost took my hand?" Alessandro's gaze fell to her bandaged palm. "Real." Silence. "The kitchen?" she whispered. "Real. Why didn't you kiss me?" He looked at her. "Because you would have been kissing Alex Barnes." Betty closed her eyes. Alessandro's throat tightened. "And he doesn't exist. Some of him does." "Which part?" He opened the door. Cold rain air entered the diner. "The part that wanted to." Betty looked at him, stricken. Alessandro placed the cap on his head. "Good night, Betty." "Where are you going?" He glanced back. The question came from instinct. She seemed to regret asking immediately. "To finish what I came here to do." Fear touched her expression. "Alessandro." He waited. She wanted to ask what that meant. He saw the question. She saw that he saw it. Neither spoke. Finally, Betty whispered, "I don't want to know." Alessandro nodded. "Then you won't." He stepped into the rain. The door closed behind him. For several seconds he stood beneath the awning, water hammering the street beyond its edge. He did not look back. If he looked back, he might return. Alessandro Bruno had survived by knowing when desire was a weakness, and when weakness became fatal. Tonight, for the first time, he understood there were losses worse than death. His phone vibrated. Paolo. Alessandro answered. "Yes. Fontaine knows something's wrong. Reyes just left Marchand's like the devil was behind him. He called 3 people before our team lost him near Esplanade." "You didn't lose him." Paolo paused. "No. Where is Fontaine?" "Dauphine Collection House." Alessandro stepped into the rain. "How many men?" 8 inside. 4 hours. Whether Fontaine knows it or not. "Cars?" 2 blocks away. "Good." Paolo waited. Alessandro's voice changed. The warmth Betty had pulled from him over 2 weeks disappeared behind steel. "Bring everyone loyal, every captain. Nobody acts until I arrive." "You're going yourself?" "Yes." "Ale. You haven't walked into a collection house personally in 15 years. Then they'll understand the significance." "And Fontaine?" Alessandro looked back once. Through the fogged diner window, he could see Betty standing exactly where he had left her, one hand resting near the card she had not yet picked up. Fontaine made a mistake. "Which one?" Alessandro's face became completely still. "He made my name the thing that hurt her." Paolo said nothing. He did not need to. Everyone who knew Alessandro Bruno understood the difference between business and personal. Business could be negotiated. Personal became history. Alessandro walked toward the waiting car. Halfway down the block, a black sedan rolled quietly from the curb. The rear door opened before he reached it. 2 men stepped out beneath umbrellas, both in dark suits, both visibly startled by the sight of their boss in second-hand boots and a torn jacket. Neither commented. They had survived this long because they understood silence. Alessandro removed the cheap cap. One man took it carefully as though it were a crown. The other opened the rear door. Alessandro paused before getting in. For 2 weeks he had lived between 2 worlds. The moment he entered that car, Alex Barnes disappeared. Alessandro Bruno returned. Yet the strange thing was that the disguise no longer felt entirely false. His hands still smelled faintly of sawdust. There was a grease stain near his thumb from the diner's cooler. In his jacket pocket sat a bent screw Betty had complained about him leaving on the counter. He could wash the dirt away. The rest would remain. "Boss?" one man asked softly. Alessandro entered the car. Dauphine. The door closed. Back inside Marchand's, Betty did not move for a long time. The rain blurred the windows until the street disappeared. The diner felt wrong without him, although he had been gone less than a minute. His toolbox remained near the ladder. He had forgotten it, or perhaps abandoned it. Betty looked toward the chipped mug beside the sink, then toward the repaired ceiling, then the front step, the new wiring, the bright letters of the sign beyond the glass. She saw Alessandro everywhere now, and did not know whether that made those things lies too. Slowly she reached for the card. The number was handwritten in dark ink. No name, no title, just 10 digits. She should throw it away. She knew that. She should tear it into pieces, lock the door, call the police, pretend the last 2 weeks had never happened. Instead, she held it in her bandaged hand and remembered the first night, a soaked man, sitting beneath the heater vent, both hands wrapped around coffee. The way he had asked why she would help someone she did not know. The surprise in his face when she said somebody had once helped her. That surprise had been real. She was sure of it. But so had Dominic Reyes' terror. Both men existed inside the same body. Betty did not know which one frightened her more, the mafia boss who could make a criminal run simply by speaking his name, or the tired handyman she had almost kissed because she had begun to believe he needed her. Outside, lightning flashed over New Orleans. Somewhere beyond the rain, Alessandro Bruno was going to finish an investigation that had begun before he ever stepped into her diner. Betty understood enough of the city to know men might not come home from whatever happened next. She hated herself for caring whether one of them did. She turned the card over in her fingers. Then, slowly, she placed it beneath the register instead of throwing it away. Across town, the black sedan turned onto Dauphine Street. Alessandro sat in the rear seat without speaking. His men watched him carefully. None of them had ever seen him dressed like this. None of them knew that 10 minutes earlier Betty Marchand had told him to leave, and he had obeyed. They saw only their boss returning from the shadows, expression calm, eyes cold, hands resting loosely on his knees. The collection house appeared ahead beneath a single yellow light. 3 vehicles waited nearby. Paolo stood beneath an awning with 6 men. When Alessandro stepped from the car, every conversation stopped. Paolo's gaze moved over the torn jacket, the old boots, then Alessandro's face. "You look terrible." "So I've been told." "By the woman?" Alessandro gave him one look. Paolo wisely changed subjects. "Fontaine's inside. He thinks Reyes is panicking over some street dispute. Doesn't know you're here." Alessandro looked at the building. 20 years of loyalty waited behind that door. 20 months of betrayal. "Good." Paolo lowered his voice. "What do you want from him?" Alessandro thought about Betty counting money from her register. He thought about her saying, "You are the name I was afraid of." He thought about her stepping backward when she learned who he was. "Everything," Alessandro said. "Every name, every route, every dollar. And I want to know every man who watched it happen." Paolo nodded. "And after?" Alessandro's eyes went to the door. "After, I decide what my name means again." He started toward the building. Halfway there, he stopped. Paolo waited. Alessandro turned slightly. "One more thing." "What?" "Marchand's." Paolo's expression changed. "What about it?" "Put 2 men on the block tonight. Far enough she never sees them." "Protection?" "Observation." Paolo almost smiled. Alessandro's stare stopped him. "Nobody enters that diner unless she asks for help." "Understood." "Nobody speaks to her. Nobody tells her anything. Nobody makes her feel watched." "Understood." Alessandro looked back once toward the direction of Marigny, though Marchand's was far beyond sight. "She asked me to leave." Paolo studied his friend's face. "And you did?" "Yes." "That must be new." Alessandro gave him a cold look. Paolo shrugged. 32 years. I'm allowed one joke." Alessandro turned toward the collection house. "You've used it." He reached the door. Before opening it, he looked down at his hands. There was still a faint flour mark near one cuff, from helping Betty move pie tins that morning. He rubbed it with his thumb. It did not disappear completely. For the first time in his life, Alessandro Bruno was about to walk into a room full of traitors carrying something more dangerous than anger. He was carrying shame. Not shame for being discovered. Shame because a good woman had looked directly at the empire he built and shown him what it looked like from the bottom. Fontaine had stolen money. Reyes had threatened people. Those were crimes Alessandro understood. But beneath them lay something harder to confront. Men had used Alessandro's shadow because the shadow was already frightening enough. He could destroy Fontaine tonight. He could erase Reyes. He could recover every dollar. None of it would change the expression on Betty's face. when she understood who had been eating pie at her counter. The most feared man in New Orleans had spent his life believing the only dangerous thing was losing control. Tonight, walking through a rain-soaked doorway toward the man who betrayed him, he finally understood something worse. He could control neighborhoods, captains, money, fear, and violence. He could control what happened to Dominic Reyes before sunrise. He could decide whether Marcus Fontaine ever spoke his name again. But 3 miles away, in a small diner under a repaired sign, Betty Marchand held a card with his number on it, and there was absolutely nothing Alessandro Bruno could do to make her use it. For once, the choice belonged entirely to someone else, and that terrified him. The first thing Marcus Fontaine did when Alessandro Bruno walked through the door was smile. It was not a good smile. It was too quick, too familiar, too desperate to prove nothing was wrong. "Ale," Fontaine said, rising from the long table at the back of the collection house. "What the hell are you doing down here?" The room had gone silent before he finished the sentence. 8 men stood or sat beneath yellow industrial lights. 2 had envelopes open in front of them. 1 held a calculator. Another had been counting cash into stacks of 20s and 50s. They were ordinary objects arranged around an ordinary table. But the way every man stopped moving transformed the room into something else entirely. Alessandro stepped inside wearing the torn jacket, old boots, and cheap clothes of Alex Barnes. That frightened them more than a suit would have. Men in Alessandro's world understood presentation. They understood black cars, polished shoes, quiet bodyguards, and expensive wool. Those things belonged to meetings. Rules existed for meetings. Men knew where to stand and when to speak. But the boss, arriving alone in another man's boots, dressed like someone who had spent the night beneath a bridge, meant there were no familiar rules left. Paolo entered behind him with 3 men. The rest stayed outside. Fontaine's smile weakened. "I heard Reyes had some kind of episode," he said. "Thought maybe that's what this was about." Alessandro looked at the table. "Sit down." Fontaine hesitated. Sit." Fontaine sat. Alessandro crossed the room slowly. Nobody moved out of his way, because nobody needed to be told. Space opened before him automatically. He stopped at the head of the table and rested both hands on the wood. There were envelopes, labeled with street names: Royal, Burgundy, Chartres, Frenchman. Alessandro picked up the one marked Frenchman and opened it. Inside was cash. Betty's money might have been among it. That thought brought the cold back. "How long?" Alessandro asked. Fontaine looked at Paolo, then back at him. "How long what?" Paolo closed his eyes briefly. It was almost pity. Alessandro looked down at the envelope. "You have known me 20 years, Marcus." Fontaine swallowed. 22. "Then you know the difference between a question and an opportunity." Silence. Alessandro lifted his eyes. "I will ask once. How long?" Fontaine's shoulders fell a fraction. 18 months. Nobody in the room breathed normally after that. Alessandro nodded slowly. "That matches the records." Fontaine's face changed. "You have records?" "I have everything." "Ale, listen to me." "No." Fontaine stopped. Alessandro looked around the table. "Every man in this room who knew what this was, raise your hand." Nobody moved. Alessandro almost smiled. "No?" Still nothing. He turned slightly toward Paolo. "Bring Silas in." A door at the side opened. 2 men escorted Silas Trent into the room. The courier looked sick. Fontaine went white. Silas avoided everyone's eyes. Alessandro placed the envelope back on the table. "Silas." "Yes, boss." "Tell Marcus what you told Paolo." Silas swallowed. Fontaine stared at him. "Silas," he warned. Alessandro did not even look at Fontaine. "Finish that sentence, and you lose the privilege of explaining yourself." Fontaine shut his mouth. Silas spoke. He listed routes, names, amounts, which businesses paid weekly, which paid monthly, which captains had accepted a percentage to ignore the operation, which collections used Bruno authority, and which used fabricated neighborhood fees. He described shell companies, storage lockers, properties purchased under relatives' names. Every word removed another layer of Fontaine's defense. When Silas finished, Alessandro asked one final question. "Marchands." Silas froze. Fontaine closed his eyes. Alessandro's voice lowered. How much? Silas named the amount. Alessandro already knew it. Hearing it aloud still changed something in the room. Fontaine leaned forward. Ale, it wasn't personal. Alessandro looked at him. Fontaine's voice gained speed. That's the point. None of it was personal. It was business. Small businesses. Cash operations. Nobody got hurt. We took what they could afford and… Alessandro moved so suddenly the men nearest the table flinched. He struck the envelope flat against the wood. Not Fontaine. The table. The sound cracked through the room. Could afford? Fontaine stopped. Alessandro's voice remained quiet, which was worse. There is a woman on Frenchman Street who delayed paying produce suppliers while your men took money from her register. Al. She almost lost her cooler because she could not afford a repair. That's not… She feeds children when their mothers cannot pay. She covers employee bills out of a business that barely covers itself. She had a roof leaking into a bucket for 2 years, while Dominic Reyes counted her money in front of her every Tuesday. Fontaine's eyes narrowed slightly. Recognition. The diner. Alessandro said nothing. Fontaine understood too much. Oh, that one sound changed the temperature of the room. Paolo's gaze moved toward Fontaine as if warning him not to continue. Fontaine continued anyway. So that's what this is. Alessandro became perfectly still. Fontaine almost laughed. Jesus Christ. Choose your next words carefully. You went down there because of the collections and somehow you… Marcus, you care about her. Alessandro's eyes hardened. Fontaine saw confirmation and made the worst mistake of his life. He smiled. A waitress? Owner. What? She owns the diner. Fontaine's smile disappeared. Alessandro leaned forward. Her name is Betty Marchand. Nobody spoke. You will remember it, Alessandro said. Even if you forget everything else tonight. Fontaine's face tightened. I didn't know she meant something to you. There it was. The exact wrong answer. Alessandro stared at him for a long moment. That is why you are sitting there. Fontaine blinked. You still do not understand. Al. If you had known, you would have left her alone. Yes. You think that helps you? Fontaine opened his mouth. Alessandro continued. You think the crime was touching something that belonged to me. Fontaine looked uncertain now. It was not. Alessandro's voice sharpened. The crime was believing she had to belong to someone important before she deserved to be left alone. Silence. Even Paolo looked at him differently. Alessandro straightened. I went into that diner, wearing clothes worth less than the meal she put in front of me. She believed I had nothing. No money, no influence, no name she recognized. He glanced around the room. She still fed me. Nobody shifted. She offered me work before I had proved anything. She gave me dignity when she thought dignity was the only thing she could afford to give. Fontaine lowered his eyes. Alessandro looked back at the envelope. And every Tuesday men using my name walked through her door and taught her the opposite lesson. His jaw tightened. You made my name the thing she feared. Fontaine tried another angle. I can give it back. Alessandro's gaze lifted. All of it. You think this is about reimbursement? I can double it. One of Paolo's men looked away. Alessandro almost pitied Fontaine then, not because he would forgive him, because Marcus Fontaine had spent 22 years beside him and still thought every loss could be converted into money. Alessandro took his hands off the table. I want every name. You have Silas. Every name. Al. Every captain who took a percentage. Every collector. Every lawyer who moved money. Every business you touched. Every person who paid you because they believed I had ordered it. Fontaine's jaw worked. And if I give you all of that? Alessandro looked at him. You get to know you told the truth once before the end. Fontaine went pale. A hand moved beneath the table. Paolo saw it. So did Alessandro. Marcus reached for the drawer beside his knee. The gun came halfway out. Alessandro was already moving. His left hand caught Fontaine's wrist and slammed it flat against the table. His right stripped the pistol free in one smooth motion and sent it sliding across the wood toward Paolo. Fontaine grunted. Nobody else moved. Alessandro bent close enough that only Fontaine could clearly hear him. 22 years, he said softly. And this is how you choose to finish. Fontaine breathed hard. You leave me no choice. Alessandro looked almost sad. That is what weak men say when they finally meet the consequences of choices they made comfortably. He released Fontaine's wrist. Fontaine did not reach for anything again. Right. Paolo put a legal pad in front of him. Fontaine stared. Everything, Alessandro said, and Marcus Fontaine began to write. By 4 in the morning, the network had been mapped. By 5, 3 captains had been stripped of authority. 2 accountants had turned over records. 4 collection routes had been shut down. By dawn, Dominic Reyes was sitting on the curb outside a police precinct with a folder in his lap and enough evidence to put himself and half Fontaine's operation into custody. He had chosen prison because prison felt safer than waiting for Alessandro Bruno to decide where else he belonged. Fontaine's fate was quieter. Alessandro never spoke about it afterward. Neither did Paolo. By sunrise, Marcus Fontaine had ceased to hold rank, property, crews, accounts, or influence inside Alessandro's world. Within a week, his name stopped being spoken. That was how power disappeared in Alessandro's organization. Not with ceremony, with silence. But none of it made Alessandro feel better. At 6:30 that morning, he stood in the marble kitchen of his own home for the first time in over 2 weeks. A housekeeper had left coffee. He did not drink it. His suit jacket lay over a chair. Someone had brought clean clothes from his bedroom, but Alessandro remained in the same white shirt he had worn beneath the torn disguise jacket. The boots were gone. The grease stain near his thumb remained. Paolo entered without knocking. "You should sleep." "No." That was not a suggestion. Alessandro looked at him. Paolo poured himself coffee. "Fine. Stay awake and become unbearable." Alessandro turned toward the window. Morning light was beginning to spread over the garden. Collections? Stopped. Every route? Every unauthorized route. Men are calling confused. Good. Businesses will be refunded. Alessandro shook his head. Carefully, Paolo frowned. No envelopes from Bruno. I know. No gifts. I know. No one goes into a store and says the boss is sorry. Paolo leaned against the counter. I know. Alessandro finally looked at him. I mean it. And I said I know. She can't think I'm buying forgiveness. Paolo's expression softened. We're talking about Marchands now. We're talking about all of them. Of course. Alessandro's star sharpened. Paolo held both hands up. All businesses get anonymous restitution through the seized accounts. Clean paperwork. No direct association. Good. And Marchands? Alessandro turned back to the window. Same. Paolo waited. Alessandro added, nothing extra. That hurts you to say. No. It visibly hurt you. Paolo. I'm old. Let me enjoy things. Alessandro ignored him. After a minute, Paolo asked, You going back? No. The answer came too quickly. Paolo heard it. She told you not to. Yes. And you're listening? Yes. Paolo nodded. I may need to sit down. Alessandro turned. Do you want to keep working for me? I'm considering retirement. Consider it outside. Paolo smiled faintly, then became serious. She safe? Yes. Does she know? No. Good. Alessandro's expression changed. There is one more thing. Paolo waited. Alessandro looked down at the countertop. Send word. To who? Everyone. Paolo's brows drew together. Everyone means? Every captain. Every crew. Every collector operating under us. Everyone who wears my name in any capacity. Paolo put the coffee down. What word? Alessandro's eyes became cold again. Marchand's diner is off limits. That's already obvious. No. Paolo waited. Alessandro spoke carefully. No collections, no arguments, no threats, no business conducted inside. Nobody bothers Betty. Nobody uses her parking lot for meetings. Nobody waits across the street looking intimidating. Nobody raises their voice at an employee. Nobody touches that place. Paolo started. Alessandro continued. If someone has a problem with Marchands, they leave. And if they don't, they answer to me personally. Paolo exhaled. That will spread. I want it to. You know what people are going to call it. Alessandro frowned. What? Your territory. No. Protected ground. No. Paolo's mouth twitched. Holy ground. Alessandro looked at him. Paolo raised an eyebrow. Too dramatic? Alessandro thought about a warm mug placed in front of a man Betty believed was broke. A slice of pie. Nobody eats a cold meal in my diner. He looked away. No, he said quietly. That's fine. Paolo's expression changed. He understood. Alessandro added, make them understand it the way they understand my mother's grave. Paolo stopped smiling entirely. No one touches. No one. Understood. Alessandro walked out of the kitchen. By noon, the rule had traveled through half the city. By nightfall, every crew knew it. There was a diner in the Marigny. Marchands. You did not collect there. You did not threaten there. You did not even conduct business there without permission. The woman who owned it was not to be approached, recruited, intimidated, flirted with for leverage, followed, watched openly, or used to reach Alessandro. Nobody said she belonged to him. That distinction mattered to Alessandro. He had already taken enough choice from her. The diner was protected because of what it represented, not because Betty had become property attached to his name. By the end of the week, men who had never met Betty were calling the place holy ground. Betty learned none of this from Alessandro. He stayed away. The first Tuesday without Dominic Reyes felt worse than the Tuesdays when he came. Betty opened Marchands at 6. Mr. Landry arrived at 6:30 and complained the eggs were too soft. They were not. Keisha came in at 8. A produce truck arrived at 9. At 10:15, Betty looked at the clock. At 11, she looked again. By noon, she had convinced herself Reyes would come later. At 1, she placed cash into an envelope out of habit. At 2, she took it back out. At 4, every time the bell rang, her shoulders tightened. At 6, nobody had come. At closing, Betty counted the register twice. The money was still there. She stood behind the counter holding the bills and felt no relief. Only dread. It was too easy. Nothing in her life had ever stopped hurting simply because someone powerful decided it should. She locked the door and went upstairs to the small apartment she sometimes used when she was too tired to drive home. The card with Alessandro's number remained in the register drawer. She did not take it upstairs. At 12:30, she came back down and moved it into her apron pocket. Then she became angry with herself and put it back. The following morning, she discovered an official letter from the company handling several old neighborhood collection accounts. It stated that unauthorized fees had been identified, future payments were suspended, and restitution would be processed through legal channels. No Bruno name. No threats. No message. Betty read it 3 times. Keisha found her staring. You okay? Yeah. That paper looks like it insulted your mother. Betty folded it. Just billing. Keisha shrugged and returned to the kitchen. Betty slid the letter beneath the register beside Alessandro's card. The next Tuesday came. Again, nobody collected. The Tuesday after that, still nothing. Slowly, the diner changed. The produce supplier received payment on time. Betty gave Keisha 2 additional shifts. She replaced a cracked refrigerator gasket she had ignored for months. She paid down an overdue utility balance. For the first time in nearly 2 years, she reached the end of a Tuesday with money left after expenses. She should have felt free. Instead, every improvement had Alessandro's shadow behind it. That made her furious. Some nights she stood beneath the ceiling. He repaired and wished it would leak again, just so one thing in the diner would stop reminding her of him. It never leaked. The sign did not rattle. The cooler ran perfectly. The pantry shelf remained level. Even the front step no longer creaked. The man had repaired everything so well that absence itself became visible. Betty hated him for that too. She also missed him. That was harder to forgive. She missed his coffee, sitting untouched, until it became exactly the temperature he liked. She missed telling him not to leave tools on the counter. She missed the way he listened when customers spoke. She missed making him laugh because his laughter always sounded surprised. She missed the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. Most of all, she missed the strange calm that had existed between them before the truth changed the meaning of everything. At first, she told herself she missed Alex. That was easier. Alex was safe. Alex had rough hands, old boots, and no references. Alex slept badly. Alex hated raisins. Alex almost kissed her in the kitchen. Alessandro Bruno was different. Alessandro made dangerous men turn pale. Alessandro had killed people. Alessandro ran an organization capable of shaping whole neighborhoods through fear. But each time Betty tried separating them completely, memory refused. Alessandro had repaired the roof. Alessandro had eaten pie. Alessandro had laughed. The man who told Dominic Reyes to let go of her wrist had the same hands that had bandaged her palm. The problem was not that one had been real and the other fake. The problem was that both had been real at the same time. That terrified her more than a simple lie would have. One evening after closing, Keisha found Betty holding the chipped mug Alessandro always used. "You going to marry that cup?" Betty nearly dropped it. "What? You've washed it 4 times. I have not. You washed it when I left for break. It was dirty. Nobody used it." Betty put it down. Keisha smiled. "Where's Alex anyway?" Betty's stomach tightened. "Gone. Found another job?" "Something like that." Keisha studied her. "You two fight?" "No." "That means yes. We didn't fight." "Uh-huh." "Keisha, I'm going home." "Good." At the door, Keisha turned. "For what it's worth, you smiled more when he was around." Betty stared. Keisha raised both hands. "I said nothing." The door closed. Betty remained behind the counter. Her eyes drifted toward the register. She opened the drawer. The card was still there. She picked it up. 10 digits. No name. She carried it home that night. For 3 weeks, Alessandro kept his promise. He did not return. He did not call. He did not send flowers. He did not send expensive gifts. He did not buy the diner. That last possibility had occurred to Betty more than once because it felt exactly like the kind of thing a powerful man might do while telling himself he was helping. He did none of it. The only evidence of him was absence. And, eventually, rumors. They began quietly. A delivery driver refused to park his truck in front of Marchand's because he did not want to block the entrance. Betty thought nothing of it. 2 days later, a man she recognized as a bookmaker came in with a friend. The friend began arguing loudly on the phone. The bookmaker grabbed his arm, whispered something, and both immediately lowered their voices. Betty noticed. A week later, a drunk customer started insulting Keisha. Before Betty could step in, another customer she barely knew stood and told the man, "Not here." The drunk laughed. The other customer leaned close and said something Betty could not hear. The drunk went pale and left. Betty watched him through the window. "What was that?" she asked. The customer looked uncomfortable. "Nothing. Didn't look like nothing." He paid his bill and left quickly. Betty's suspicion hardened. The answer came from her produce supplier. Mr. Carver was 63 and incapable of keeping secrets longer than 6 minutes. He was unloading tomatoes one morning when he looked around the diner and said, "Place looks good. Thank you. Quiet, too." "It's 10 in the morning." "No, I mean quiet." Betty stopped checking the invoice. "What does that mean?" Carver realized too late. "Nothing." "Mr. Carver, I should unload lettuce." "You hate lettuce." "I tolerate it professionally." She blocked the kitchen door. "What do you know?" He sighed. "My driver heard from his cousin." "About?" Carver lowered his voice. "This place." "What about it?" "Apparently nobody's supposed to bother you." Betty's stomach tightened. "Says who?" Carver gave her a look. She already knew. "Say it." "Bruno." Her chest went cold. "What exactly did you hear?" Carver became fascinated by the invoice. "Just street talk." "What street talk?" "Betty." "Tell me." He exhaled. "They call this holy ground." She stared. "What?" "I told you it sounded stupid." "Holy ground?" "Meaning nobody collects here. Nobody conducts business here. Nobody raises trouble here. Supposedly, if anybody touches the place, they answer directly to him." Betty's face burned. "To Alessandro." Carver's eyebrows rose. "You call him Alessandro?" She glared. "Keep talking." "That's all." "No. There's more." Carver looked genuinely reluctant. "One guy said Bruno told them to treat the diner like his mother's grave." Betty closed her eyes. "Oh my God. Kind of dramatic." "That impossible man." Carver studied her face. "You know him." "Unload the tomatoes." "Betty." "Tomatoes." He obeyed. The moment he disappeared into the kitchen, Betty grabbed Alessandro's card from her purse. She nearly called. Her thumb hovered over the number. Then she stopped. Anger arrived first. He had done it anyway. Protection she had not asked for. Rules carrying his name. People behaving differently because of him. Exactly what she had accused him of. She put the phone down. Then another thought intruded. Nobody had approached her. Nobody had told her she owed Alessandro anything. No man had arrived saying the boss had protected her and expected gratitude. No envelope. No expensive car. No message. Nothing. The rule existed entirely away from her. She thought about what Carver said. The diner was protected. Not Betty belongs to Bruno. Not touch his woman. Not the boss's girl. The diner. Marchand's. Holy ground. It was infuriating. It was also, annoyingly, different. Betty sat in the booth where she and Alessandro had once talked late at night. She remembered telling him powerful men always decided things for other people. He had listened. He had not entirely stopped being powerful. But somehow, he had protected the place, without turning the protection into ownership. She hated that this distinction mattered. It did. The number remained uncalled. That night, Alessandro sat alone in his dining room, eating food he could not taste. The table seated 16. He occupied one chair. A chef had prepared sea bass, roasted vegetables and bread. Alessandro missed red beans eaten from a chipped bowl behind a diner. He found that humiliating. Paolo entered from the hallway. You know normal people knock. You know normal people don't own 7 dining rooms. This house has 1 dining room. There are 6 other rooms containing tables larger than my apartment. Alessandro kept eating. Paolo sat across from him. She knows. The fork stopped. Alessandro looked up. Knows what? Holy ground. Alessandro's expression tightened. How? Produce supplier. Carver. You know the produce supplier? Yes. Paolo started. Alessandro frowned. What? You know the produce supplier's name. Why wouldn't I? You have never known the name of the man who delivers food to your own house. Alessandro put the fork down. What does she know? Enough. Did anyone talk to her? No. Good. She almost called. His eyes sharpened. How do you know? I don't. Alessandro's stare became murderous. Paolo smiled. I wanted to see your face. Get out. That was worth the drive. Paolo. Fine. He stood, then paused. She hasn't called, Ale. I'm aware. 3 weeks. I know. You could go. No. She may think you don't care. She told me to leave. She also kept your number. Alessandro looked at him. How do you know that? Paolo hesitated. Produce supplier. That man talks too much. Apparently. Alessandro leaned back. I said the choice was hers. And I meant it. Paolo studied him. You've lived your whole life believing patience is a weapon. It is. This isn't a negotiation. I know. Then what are you waiting for? Alessandro looked toward the empty chair beside him. The right to go back. Paolo's expression softened. She may never give it. I know. And you're willing to accept that? Alessandro's jaw tightened. No. Paolo waited. Alessandro added, but I will. That silenced him. Another week passed. Betty continued not calling. Alessandro continued not going. Then Tuesday came again. Rain returned to New Orleans. Not the violent sideways storm of their first meeting, but steady autumn rain that polished streets black and turned every streetlight into a blurred reflection. At 8:45, Betty sent Keisha home. At 9, she flipped the sign to closed. At 9 to 10, she made coffee she did not want. At 9:15, she opened the register and looked at Alessandro's card. She had moved it back from her purse 2 days earlier. Somehow that felt less intimate. At 9:20, she picked it up. At 9:21, the bell rang. Betty looked up. Alessandro stood in the doorway. For 1 second, her mind placed the old clothes on him automatically. Then reality corrected itself. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a dark suit. No tie. White shirt open at the throat. Clean shaven. Hair neatly combed back. The man in the doorway looked expensive without trying. Controlled. Powerful. Exactly like someone newspapers would call businessman when they were afraid to print anything more specific. He also looked nervous. That nearly broke her. Alessandro did not enter fully. He remained just inside the doorway, one hand holding the door so it would not swing closed behind him. You didn't call. Betty stared. No. I know. Then why are you here? His eyes moved to the card in her hand. Betty looked down and immediately put it on the counter. Too late. He had seen it. I told you the choice was yours. Alessandro said. It is. Yes. Then this is a strange way of demonstrating that. A small breath left him. Fair. Betty folded her arms. You have 5 minutes. More than I expected. 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Something almost like a smile touched his face. It disappeared quickly. I came because I realized I said something dishonest. Betty stiffened. What? When I left, I told myself I would never come back unless you called. That seemed honest. It was. Then what changed? Alessandro looked at her. I learned I could respect your choice without pretending I didn't have one of my own. Betty said nothing. My choice is that I want you in my life. Her throat tightened. He continued. That does not give me a right to you. It does not make your answer less important. But disappearing forever without telling you clearly what I wanted started to feel like another kind of cowardice. Betty's eyes burned. You told me you stayed because of me. I did. That was pretty clear. No. He stepped one pace farther inside, but stopped well away from the counter. I told you while everything was collapsing. You were scared, angry. You had just learned almost everything you believed about me was wrong. Not almost. Fair. You lied about your name, your money, your work, your life. Yes. You investigated people from my diner without telling me. Yes. You knew Dominic was coming. Yes. And you still let him through my door. Alessandro's face tightened. That is the decision I regret most. Because he touched me? Because I believed being able to protect you was the same as giving you safety. Betty went still. Alessandro continued. It wasn't. She looked at him carefully. No, you were right. About which part? That I decided for you. Rain tapped the glass. Betty's arms slowly loosened. I don't forgive that. I didn't come asking you to. Then what are you asking? Alessandro took a breath. One question. What? Do you want me to leave? Betty stared at him. That's your question? Yes. You came all this way for that? Yes. You own cars. One brought me. Betty almost laughed. She hated him for making that possible. What happens if I say yes? I leave. And then? You never see me again unless you contact me. No men watching? Not openly. Her eyes narrowed. Alessandro. He sighed. No men, unless there is a credible threat unrelated to me. That sounds suspiciously lawyered. I employ many lawyers. There. What? That. He looked confused. You make me laugh when I'm trying to be furious. I apologize. You don't. No. Silence settled between them. Betty looked at him fully. This was not Alex Barnes. Not visually. No torn elbow. No rain-soaked cap. No second-hand boots. But when she looked closer, there were things she recognized. The way he held tension in his jaw. The slight scar near his right thumb. The eyes that became unexpectedly uncertain whenever the subject turned personal. The man had not vanished. He had simply been surrounded by more truth. I know about holy ground, she said. Alessandro closed his eyes briefly. Carver, he talks too much. Yes. You told criminals my diner is holy. I told them not to touch it. You compared it to your mother's grave. He looked almost embarrassed. It was language they understood. Betty stared. You understand how insane that sounds? Yes. You made half the underworld scared to raise their voice in my restaurant. Not half. What? Less than half. Her mouth opened. Do not correct the percentage. Sorry. No, you're not. No. She shook her head and looked away, because she was smiling despite herself. It faded quickly. Why? Alessandro's expression softened. Why? What? Why the diner? He seemed confused. You know why. I want to hear you say it. Alessandro looked around Marchand's. The old booths, the pie case, the repaired ceiling, the warm light above the counter. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, because nobody had given me anything without wanting something in return for a very long time. Betty swallowed. You gave me a meal when you thought I had no value to you. That doesn't make a building holy. No. He looked back at her. You did. Her eyes filled instantly. She hated that. She wiped beneath one eye. Don't say things like that. They're true. You saying something is true doesn't make it less manipulative. I know. Do you? Yes. He took another breath. That is why I did not tell you about the protection, so I wouldn't feel indebted. Yes. And you didn't pay off my diner. I considered it. Betty's head snapped up. Alessandro raised a hand. For approximately 8 seconds. You considered buying my diner? Paying the debt. You don't even know all my debt. I do. Her jaw dropped. He immediately knew he had made a mistake. You what? I saw enough paperwork while repairing the cabinet. You memorized my finances? I remember numbers. That does not improve this. I know. How much do I owe on the building? Alessandro remained silent. Her eyes narrowed. Say it. He named the exact amount. Betty stared in disbelief. You are unbelievable. I have been told. By me. Mostly. She paced behind the counter once. And you didn't pay it? No. Why? Because you would hate me. Yes. And because it's yours. That stopped her. Alessandro continued. If you ever ask me for help, I will help. But I will not make your diner mine by solving a problem you did not give me permission to solve. Betty looked at him. That distinction again. Always the distinction. Power versus permission. He was learning. Slowly. Imperfectly. But learning. You scare me, she said. Alessandro did not move. I know. I don't mean Dominic scared. I know. I mean I know what you've done. Yes. I know what you're capable of. Yes. And I don't know if there are things in your life I could ever accept. There are. His answer startled her. You're not supposed to agree. I told you I wouldn't lie in here. Betty's eyes stung. He remembered. The boundary she had not yet formally given him, but somehow he had understood. She looked down. I have spent 4 weeks trying to decide whether caring about you makes me stupid. Alessandro's face changed. And? I haven't decided. That's fair. I've tried to separate you into 2 men. He waited. Alex and Alessandro. His jaw tightened at the false name. Alex was easier. Yes. He needed things. Yes. He let me help him. Yes. Alessandro doesn't need anything. That is not true. Betty looked up. His eyes held hers. For the first time, the powerful man in the expensive coat looked more exposed than the homeless handyman had ever looked. What do you need? She asked. Alessandro answered without hesitation. A place where nobody is afraid of me. The words settled between them. Betty's anger did not vanish. Neither did fear, but something shifted. You have a house. Yes. A very ridiculous one, I assume. Yes. Employees. Yes. Friends? 1 or 2, depending on Paolo's mood. Despite herself, Betty smiled. Alessandro continued. I have places I own, places I control, places where I am respected. None of them are what I mean. Betty's smile faded. He looked at the stool near the register. The first night, I sat there and you told me it was the warmest seat. I remember. I had spent the entire day learning how people treated a man they believed had nothing. Betty's eyes lowered. Then I walked in here. Alessandro's voice roughened. You were the only person who looked at me and did not calculate what I was worth before deciding whether to be kind. She swallowed. That doesn't erase what you are. I know. I need you to understand that. I do. I will never become somebody who closes her eyes because the dangerous man happens to be gentle with her. I would despise you if you did. Betty looked sharply at him. He meant it. That startled her more than agreement. Alessandro stepped no closer. I am not asking you to approve of everything outside this room. Then what are you asking? To know me without pretending. Betty breathed slowly. All of you? As much as I am able to give. That sounds carefully phrased. It is. Meaning there are things you won't tell me. Yes. Because they're criminal? Sometimes. Dangerous? Sometimes. Things I would hate? Yes. Her heart hurt. Alessandro's eyes did not leave hers. But I will never lie about what kind of thing they are. Betty studied him. That may not be enough. I know. You keep saying that. Because I know. Silence. Then Betty asked, Did you kill Fontaine? Alessandro became still. There it was. The question he had expected. He did not answer immediately. Betty nodded sadly. That's an answer. No. She looked at him. No, I did not kill him. Her shoulders loosened slightly. Did you hurt him? Yes. She closed her eyes. Alessandro continued before she could imagine worse. I removed him. His businesses, authority, money, connections. And physically, he reached for a gun. Betty looked at him. Alessandro's expression gave nothing. Is he alive? Yes. She exhaled. Dominic? In police custody. What? He decided prison was safer. Betty almost laughed from shock. You scared a man into turning himself in? Yes. That is insane. Yes. You agree too easily. You prefer lying? No. Then we have a problem. A laugh escaped her. This time, neither pretended it had not. The tension cracked. Not disappeared. Cracked. Alessandro watched her carefully. Betty wiped at her cheek. You really hate raisins? Yes. Of all the things you told me, that's what you chose to prove your humanity with. I dislike them intensely. That is not a personality. It is a principle. She laughed again. Alessandro smiled. The smile transformed his face exactly as it had when he was Alex. Betty's heart clenched. There he was. Not separate. Not false. Still there. She came around the counter. Alessandro stopped smiling. He did not move toward her. Betty walked until only a few feet remained between them. You know what keeps bothering me? What? You left. His brow furrowed. I asked you to. I know. That was why. No. She shook her head. I mean, it keeps bothering me because every other powerful man in my life eventually decided my no was negotiable. Alessandro's expression sharpened. Your husband? No. She saw the question and answered before he could feel guilty. Not him. She looked down. Banks. Collectors. Landlords. Men who thought being widowed meant I needed advice. Men who told me what was good for me. Dominic. Everybody had a reason my choice mattered less than theirs. Her eyes lifted. You could have stayed. Yes. You could have told me I was emotional. Yes. You could have reminded me what you'd done for the diner. Yes. You could have bought the building, paid everything, surrounded me with protection, and made it impossible to tell where gratitude ended and obligation started. Yes. But you left. You asked. That matters to me. Alessandro said nothing. Betty's voice weakened. It matters more than I want it to. He looked at her with an emotion she could not immediately name. Hope frightened him. That was what it was. Alessandro Bruno was afraid to hope. Betty almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The most dangerous man she had ever met stood 3 feet away, looking like a condemned man, waiting for a verdict from a diner owner. What happens outside? She asked. Outside? If I say you can come back. His breathing changed. Nothing you don't want. That's vague. You set the rules. All of them? For anything involving you. And the diner. Yes. No men hanging around. Agreed. No guns inside. Alessandro hesitated. Betty's eyebrows rose. Alessandro. Mine. All guns. He considered. If there is an active threat. No. Bettu. This is my diner. His jaw tightened. The old boss appeared for half a second. Betty folded her arms. He looked at her. She looked back. Finally, Alessandro exhaled. All right. No guns inside. No guns inside. No meetings. Agreed. No threatening people. Agreed. No saying things like, I know where you sleep. He actually looked embarrassed. You heard that. The whole diner heard that. I was making a point. Make quieter points. Yes, ma'am. Betty stared. He had said it exactly the way he used to after she ordered him off ladders. Her face crumpled before she could stop it. Alessandro's expression changed. Betty. She shook her head. Don't. He remained where he was. A tear fell. Then another. I'm still angry. You should be. I still don't trust you completely. You shouldn't. I may never be comfortable with everything. You won't. Can you stop agreeing for 1 second? No. She laughed through tears. Alessandro smiled faintly. Betty looked toward the door. Rain streamed down the glass. Then she looked at him again. Holy ground? His smile disappeared. What? You seriously called my diner holy ground? I did not personally name it. Paolo, possibly. And you allowed it. Yes. Betty shook her head. Why? Alessandro looked around the room. When he answered, there was nothing performative in his voice. It's the only holy ground I've got. Betty stopped breathing. The sentence went through every defense she had spent 4 weeks building. The repaired roof, the chipped mug, the warmest stool, his hands around coffee, the terrifying man who had forgotten he was allowed to eat. She crossed the remaining distance before thinking better of it. Alessandro did not reach for her. That mattered too. He waited. Betty stopped close enough to see the faint line of exhaustion beneath his eyes. You look tired. I am. Eating? Yes. Liar. His mouth twitched. Not well. Of course. She glanced toward the counter, then back at him. The words came naturally because they had been waiting since the first night. Well, come in. Alessandro's eyes changed. Betty swallowed. You're letting the cold in. For a moment he could not speak. Then he turned, closed the door carefully, and locked the rain outside. Betty walked behind the counter. Alessandro approached the same stool where he had sat the first night. He paused beside it. May I? Betty looked at him. You used to sit without permission. I'm learning. She pointed. Sit. He sat. Betty reached beneath the counter and brought out the chipped mug. Alessandro starred. You kept that. It's a mug. It's my mug. It belongs to the diner. Of course, but nobody else uses it. His eyes lifted. Betty pretended not to notice. She poured coffee. Then she opened the pie case. Pachan? Yes. No raisin. Thank God. Do not bring God into your raisin problem. Alessandro almost laughed. Betty placed the plate down. He looked at the pie and then at her. I can pay now. She leaned against the counter. You could pay then. He froze. Betty smiled softly. I figured that out. Alessandro looked down. She rested one hand beside his mug. Eat. He picked up the fork. For several minutes, neither spoke. Rain filled the quiet. Eventually, Betty said, I need one more rule. Alessandro swallowed the bite. Anything. In here you don't pretend. He looked at her. No Alex Barnes. No. No boss either. His brow furrowed. What does that leave? Betty considered him. A stubborn man who fixes things and forgets he's allowed to eat. Alessandro's expression broke into something softer than she had ever seen. That man sounds difficult. He is. Underpaid? Extremely. Benefits? Coffee. Anything else? Betty's hand moved across the counter. For one suspended second, it rested near his. Exactly where it had rested the night. His phone interrupted them. This time, Alessandro did not move first. Betty did. She placed her hand over his. His fingers went still beneath hers. The most dangerous man in New Orleans looked down at their hands, as if he had never seen anything more fragile. Betty's voice was quiet. This does not mean I'm okay with everything. I know. It does not mean you get to decide what happens to me. I know. It does not mean I'm yours. Alessandro turned his hand slowly beneath hers, palm upward, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She did not. No, he said. It means I'm here because you let me be. Betty looked at him. That's a better answer. He gently closed his fingers around hers. Not possessive, not tight, just enough. Outside, men crossed streets when Alessandro Bruno's cars approached. Captains measured their words around him. Politicians returned calls. Enemies spoke his name carefully. Across the city, people had spent decades constructing a mythology around the man at Betty's counter. Some called him ruthless. Some called him brilliant. Some called him criminal. Some called him king. Inside Marchand's, none of those names mattered. His coat hung beside the door. His phone remained silent in his pocket. There were no bodyguards at the counter. No envelopes. No weapons. No men waiting for instructions. Only coffee. Varm P. Rain against glass. And Betty's hand resting over his. A month earlier, Alessandro had walked 11 blocks through a storm because he believed becoming invisible would help him expose a traitor. He had been right. He found the stolen money. He found Fontaine. He found Reyes. He found every weak place inside the empire he had built. But the most important thing he discovered had nothing to do with betrayal. For decades, Alessandro had believed being seen meant being recognized. A room going quiet. A door opening. A man remembering his name. Betty taught him something else. Recognition was not the same as being known. The city recognized Alessandro Bruno. Betty knew the man who hated raisins. The man who could repair wiring. The man who slept badly. The man who became lonely and disguised loneliness as independence. The man who had done terrible things and refused to make them prettier when she asked. The man who had enough power to take and was learning, awkwardly and painfully, to ask. Months later, people still whispered about Marchand's. Nobody collected there. Nobody caused trouble. Young soldiers warned each other before entering. Watch your mouth. That's holy ground. Most of them imagined the rule existed because Betty Marchand belonged to Alessandro Bruno. They were wrong. Alessandro understood the distinction even if they never did. Betty belonged to herself. That was precisely why the place mattered. On Tuesdays, Alessandro sometimes came near closing, sometimes in a suit, sometimes with his sleeves rolled up because Betty had discovered the ice machine made a strange noise and, despite owning multiple companies capable of replacing it before breakfast, Alessandro insisted he could repair it. "You know we can hire somebody," Betty told him one evening. He was kneeling behind the machine with a wrench. "That is why businesses fail." Betty folded her arms. Businesses fail because they hire repairmen? Because owners stop understanding how things work. You own approximately everything. Not this. He looked up. Betty smiled. Correct answer. He returned to the machine. 5 minutes later, something clanged. Betty leaned over the counter. "You break it?" "No." That sounded broken. It was already broken. "Alex." Alessandro looked up. She had not used the false name in months. Betty's eyes widened. "Sorry." He stared at her, then slowly smiled. "No." "What?" "I liked it." Betty softened. "Alex?" "From you." She studied him. "You know that man never really existed." Alessandro tightened a bolt. "Parts did." "Which parts?" He looked toward her. "The parts worth keeping." Betty went quiet. Then she shook her head. "You get sentimental under appliances. I'm trapped back here." "Good." She returned to her receipts. Alessandro smiled to himself. There were still difficult days. They were not transformed into fantasy simply because love had entered them. Betty sometimes learned things about Alessandro's world she hated. Alessandro sometimes disappeared for 2 days and returned unwilling to discuss where he had been. They argued. Real arguments. Once Betty refused to speak to him for an entire evening because she discovered he had quietly intimidated her landlord into fixing a drainage problem. "I did not intimidate him." He arrived at 6 in the morning with 3 workers and apologized 14 times. "He has manners." He nearly cried. "He is emotional." Alessandro. He apologized. Eventually. Another time, Betty found herself frightened after a newspaper reported an arrest connected to one of Alessandro's old businesses. She asked him directly whether she was in danger. Instead of saying no automatically, Alessandro sat with her at the counter and explained what he could. That mattered. Truth became something they practiced, rather than something either achieved perfectly. Betty never became comfortable with violence. Alessandro never became a harmless man. She did not save him by turning him into someone else. He did not love her by turning her into someone who tolerated anything. They remained difficult, complicated, sometimes impossible, but honest. And strangely, honesty proved more intimate than safety. 1 year after the night, Alessandro first entered Marchand's. Rain came again. Heavy rain. Sideways from the river. Betty stood behind the counter watching it. Alessandro arrived at 9:30. He wore a dark coat, but no umbrella. He was soaked. Betty stared at him as the bell rang. "You own umbrellas?" "Yes." "You own cars?" "Yes." "You probably own a company that manufactures umbrellas." "No." "Are you sure?" "I can check." She threw a dish towel at him. Alessandro caught it. "You're dripping on my floor." He looked down. Something in his face became deliberately innocent. "I'm sorry." Betty froze. Then she understood. A year earlier, the first night, the same words. She laughed. Alessandro removed his coat. "Coffee?" Betty reached for his mug. "Can you pay?" He checked his pockets. "I only have enough for coffee." She stared at him. Alessandro kept a perfectly straight face. Betty pointed toward the door. "Get out." He laughed. She laughed, too. Then she poured the coffee. A moment later, she placed pecan pie in front of him. Alessandro looked down. "I didn't order this." Betty leaned across the counter. "Weather emergency." His smile disappeared. Emotion replaced it. Even after a year, Certain memories remained too close. Betty saw it. She placed her hand on his. Hey. He looked at her. You came back. Alessandro's fingers closed around hers. Yes. And you're still letting the cold in. He glanced toward the door. It's closed. I was being poetic. You're terrible at it. Betty narrowed her eyes. Eat your pie. Yes, ma'am. Outside. New Orleans remained New Orleans. Money moved. Deals were made. Men leet. Men betrayed. Power changed hands. Somewhere, people still spoke Alessandro Bruno's name with fear. That life did not disappear because love entered it. But every Tuesday, one stool near the register remained empty until he arrived. A chipped mug waited behind the counter. Nobody else used it. The diner still served people who could not always pay. Betty still lied about free meals in her books. Alessandro still complained it was a terrible business model. She still reminded him his first meal had been free. He never found an answer to that. And Marchand's remained holy ground. Not because a mafia boss declared it so. Not really. It was holy, because years earlier, a widow who had almost nothing left had looked at a stranger soaked by rain and decided his hunger mattered. That one act traveled outward. It changed Alessandro. Alessandro destroyed a corrupt network because of what he saw through Betty's eyes. Dozens of businesses stopped paying illegal collections. Men who believed poor people were invisible learned otherwise. A small kindness passed from a bakery owner to Betty, from Betty to Alessandro, and from Alessandro outward in ways none of them could have predicted. Betty had once said kindness could not always be paid backward. Sometimes it had to be passed forward. She had been right. Alessandro spent most of his life believing power meant making people obey. Betty taught him that there was another kind. The power to give without knowing what would return. The power to say no to someone who could destroy you. The power to see a man clearly and refuse both the easy lie that he was good and the easy lie that he was nothing but bad. And Alessandro learned the hardest lesson of all. Love was not possession. Protection was not permission. Being feared was not the same as being respected. Being recognized was not the same as being known. Some men spend their whole lives building empires because they believe what they want is power. Sometimes what they really wanted was one place where the door opened without their name being required. One person who would tell them when they were wrong. One warm stool. One chipped mug. One hand reaching across a counter because it chose to. Years later, Alessandro would still remember 11 doors closing in his face. He would remember Dominic Reyes looking at torn clothes and deciding the man inside them was worthless. He would remember every insult. But when he thought about that night, none of those doors mattered. Only the 12th. The one with warm yellow light behind fogged glass. The one Betty Marchand opened without asking who he was. The one that changed everything. And on nights when rain came sideways from the river, Alessandro would sometimes stand outside Marchand's for a few seconds before entering, remembering the man he had been when he first crossed that street. Powerful, feared, rich beyond reason, and completely unknown. Then the bell would ring. Betty would look up. Well, come in, she would say. And Alessandro Bruno, the coldest man in New Orleans, would go home.